This now we're live. Okay. Now we're live. Okay, finally decided to work. Yay. So, hey everyone, sorry about that. We had some technical issues, so I'm here with Pluribus Unum, who's a great YouTuber, and please tell us a little bit about your channel. And this is the second time we're having to do this because I messed up the first time.
So, as he said before, my YouTube moniker is Pluribus Unum about political history and the likes, mostly dealing with minor parties because, well, the mainstream media kind of forgot to talk about them. So I think, hey, actually, similar to some of the things that did, and we both come from the same political. So, yep, we're kind of similar.
Oh, you're kind of cutting out.
Uh, well, that's okay. So
There we are.
I mean, Plymouth, as stated before, and I do videos similar to you mostly do political history and the likes. I mostly do with not.
Okay. You there?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, it's just being futzy for us, but okay. So what we want to do is we're gonna be talking about past presidential elections and who we'd be voting for in each one. So yeah, let's just jump right into it with the first one here with 1788. With that one, and do we really need to explain this one all that much, or there's only really one candidate?
Well, yeah, we obviously have to vote for John Adams. No, I'm just kidding. It's obviously we're both probably just gonna be like, why not? He's pretty much the only guy. So George Washington.
Obviously, yeah. Washington's the only real one. Of course, there was also the vice presidential thing there with the electoral college was weird the way it initially worked and is archaic now. But uh, like of the Federalist or anti-Federalist of the candidates for vice president, which would you probably lean towards there?
Who were the ones in the VP slot? I kind of
So there was like
forgot
John
about that.
Adams, John Jay, Richard Harrison, who is some guy from Maryland, John Rutledge from South Carolina, John Hancock from Massachusetts, George Clinton from New York, who is an anti-federalist, and then a few other guys no one remembers.
Mm, that's it's a loaded question because to be honest, I don't know much about those guys.
Yeah.
It's just a bit loaded. Maybe for the sake of who looks like they're the most popular, I'm gonna pick John Jay because I don't like John Adams.
Yeah.
And kind of just he's the person who received the third most electoral votes, so
Yeah.
why not?
I would have gone with George Clinton because I do think that the Articles of Confederation were obviously not a working solution, but uh, some of the solutions of the Federalists were very elitist. So I would probably have gone with Clinton for that reason. But obviously, Washington was the first one. So let's just go ahead and get into 1792. And wow, a you know, real close one here too.
Yeah, the results were just a little too close to count.
Yeah.
It was he barely edged it out.
Yeah.
So we'll just go ahead and just say again George Washington.
Yeah. And then the vice presidential one, it was John Adams, George Clinton, Thomas Jefferson, and Aaron Burr.
I probably would have chosen Thomas Jefferson for VP because I kind of have a like Jefferson seems the most he was able to combat the Federalists more elitist type like you're being elitist I'm more of a populist and has a history with his critiques of religion. So
Yeah.
he just seems like a really interesting candidate.
Yeah, he was Jefferson was an interesting guy. He was had these weird obsessions, and like did not like I'm gonna have to really qualify what I say here. No way am I defending slavery in any way, shape, or form. But he did not know how to run his own plantation. Kind of like he was into like weird crop development stuff, like breeding crops that were inedible. So, but he then wanted to throw these giant parties. So he would have to like buy food from his slaves who would grow potatoes and carrots and stuff in their own gardens, so he could throw these parties. He was a nutcase, but he was politically he had some actually pretty good ideas on democracy and whatnot. So I would probably have voted for him as the vice president too. Uh, but of course, Washington for president, there was not really any competition there. Uh, so let's move on to '96. Now we finally get into elections that where there's competition, uh, and I think we can. There were two main candidates here. Like you don't really get third parties quite yet. It's Adams versus Jefferson, and from the sounds of it, I think we're on the same page here.
So yeah, I probably would have leaned more towards Jefferson
Yeah,
because of his more populist, right? His democratic ideas. I mean, if I were a voter back then, I probably would have been like, yeah, he stinks on slavery, but what do you do?
yeah. Like it is kind of a that is a conundrum when looking back on these in the past. We can't like when trying to apply our modern days things, and like I'm a socialist. Socialism wasn't quite a thing yet, so I can't really say, oh well, who is the socialist choice? But Jefferson, I think his views and his interests align more with just mine because he was more in the interest of average people. While Adams was very much, you know, he was an elitist. It was no like he wanted a hereditary presidency was his idea. It was
And he also just said, screw the First Amendment.
Yeah, he did that. Yeah, he did that one too. Uh, Another thing, though, and this was one of the things that Adams attacked Jefferson on a lot, was they accused Jefferson of being too pro France. But the thing is, I think that we should have been taking a bit more of the lessons from the French Revolution over here. So, obviously, an alliance with France definitely would align more with what I would like to see there. So, I would definitely be more aligned with Jefferson. And I'm not just saying that
And I mean,
because,
to be fair, John Adams was so friendly to the British.
yeah,
Which makes being friendly to the French makes more sense because they helped us out in the Revolution.
yeah, and like I have Irish ancestry, and so I have, like Jefferson, this long-standing feud with England. So, can you imagine if Jefferson was president today? His first move, we're gonna nuke England. Just like I could see him doing that, but yeah. So let's move on to 1800, and now it's just a rematch.
So more than pro.
Pardon?
I would have probably just been.
I can't hear you. Sorry.
I said this would be pretty much the same thing, except the only difference is my vote would have been successful.
Yes, same. Yeah, and also now the Alien Sedition Act is, finally on the books here. So that's just I I do not know how like anyone thought those or how Adams thought they were okay back in the day. But you know, yeah, the Alien and Sedition Acts were you know the only thing that has come along since then that really can match it easily to some of the worst laws in American history were probably the Espionage Act and the Sedition Act during World War One. But we'll get to that one later. Yeah, with some of my favorite elections. But now in 1804, we don't have Adams, but we're Jefferson again. But now it's George Clinton, who we talked about earlier, with that, and then it's Charles C. Pink, Pinkner, Pinkney, and Rufus King, who are the former U.S. ministers to France and Britain. So yeah, that was a little weird, but
Personally, I still feel inclined to vote Jefferson.
yeah,
Like it, just personally, it didn't seem like he was doing a terribly bad job at that point. So let's just then give him a
Yeah, yeah. One of the one of the big issues in that one was the Burr Hamilton duel, as people watching the live stream can see with the general with the Wikipedia page talking about that. Uh, that was one of the things that just really killed the Federalists and also killed Aaron Burr. Uh, you know, it was they Aaron Burr literally shot the leader of the Federalists and destroyed his political career in the process, which did make for a great musical, but um, just the actual policies that Jefferson was implementing on a lot of it. The Louisiana Purchase is a little. I have mixed feelings about because I'm not a fan of imperialism in general, but uh, his policies were directed more at helping common farmers and expanding democracy. So I'm, definitely more favorable towards those. So the Democratic Republicans were, far more aligned with my views than the Federalists obviously were. Even though ultimately it was the Federalists that, their economic policies wound up being the ones that determined the you know, American history. But let's go ahead and move on to 1808 with Madison and Pinckney and King again. And this
it's
one,
kind of they said I'm like
pardon?
no, what were you saying?
Oh, oh shoot. Okay, I need to. Okay, I need to fix something real fast. I need to stop the stream for a sec because we are. Can I pause the stream or? Okay, never mind. We'll be fine. We're just giving it a higher than normal bit rate. It looks like so. There's a bit of a technical glitch issue, but never mind. We should be fine. But the yeah, with 1808, again, I'm gonna go with Madison. Uh, you gotta go with the Democratic Republicans
Yeah,
here.
I'd probably go with Madison as well.
Yeah, there's not a
And
whole.
by Madison's time, it seemed that the Democratic Republican Party was starting to adopt some of the Federalist platform that was actually good,
Yeah,
like less elitist.
yeah, you're right. They were, they were starting to acknowledge the necessity of some of the tariffs, although they did, target them a bit more at northern industrialists, uh, which definitely did not win them many favors in New England. But we were kind of moving towards a one-party state basically at that point because the Federalists were just so weak. They only got about 30% of the vote of the popular vote, and carried 5 states in the electoral college. So it was just kind of embarrassing for them. They just after I don't believe they won any elections after 1800 or no, yeah, 1800. That was Adams. Huh?
When you're running a platform of like business from a farmer, then you're not going to really vote so well.
Yeah, you're really not. But now things are we start to get a little bit more interesting with 1812 because right now the country's at it's a freaking war. uh, you know, I, I get why we hold our elections during wars, but that one I'm not even sure how they managed it because it was so we were literally being invaded. So yeah, but this one,
Well, I mean, you just got to move on.
yeah,
You just got to keep on trucking.
shut up and row, as my dad always said. Um, I'm looking down, the Federalist didn't even well, they ran a candidate, but he didn't really do anything. He carried only 2% of the vote and zero electoral votes. There were just two Democratic Republicans, and it was Madison versus DeWitt Clinton, uh, who Clinton kind of being, I guess, vaguely against the war, but and kind of just trying to appeal to the populace or not to the Federalists. And it's just you know, why bother, dude? Yeah,
So yeah, we sticking with Madison this time
Oh
around.
yeah, I'm sticking with Madison easily, but you know,
Yeah, I would too. This guy, even this other guy's just irrelevant. Just no.
yeah, it's like there was DeWitt Clinton, who was another Democrat Republican, and then Rufus King again, who is the straight Federalists, and all the Federalists just voted for DeWitt Clinton with the exception of 2% of them, so it was just kind of embarrassing. Uh, but yeah, they were like there was talk in the northern states actually about secession at this time, and I'm not a fan of secession from the United States, at least, with maybe exception of Hawaii, because our possession of them is so freaking illegal. But like it's for the mainland U.S. No, like I just don't support it. But let's go ahead and move on to uh, 1816, the start of the era of good feelings. And what the hell, Rufus King? He's back again. Like, yeah. But also by this time, the Democratic Republicans and the Federalists are basically indistinguishable. So, yeah,
Yeah, pretty much.
yeah, like they're saying, yeah, let's keep the bank and the protective tariffs, and it's basically flip a coin. The only difference is Monroe is you know a bit more friendly to farmers, was his interest, and King again is a businessman, but their policies are virtually identical. So like it gets kind of boring in these first few. Like they call it the era of good feelings, and like when we moved to 1820, we are into a real nail biter here. But yeah, it's Monroe again. Only like one guy votes against, doesn't vote for Monroe in the Electoral College, and it's some guy in, I think it's New Hampshire, I think, who decides to vote for John Quincy Adams for some reason. But the only candidate to come close to,
I guess it's just protests.
yeah, it was just a protest vote, really. Uh, and but the only candidate to gain any real traction in the election at all against Monroe was literally no candidate, with 16% of the vote. Yeah. So like,
Yeah, I wouldn't have been them. I would have stuck with Monroe both times.
yeah, it was doing a pretty good job. They called it the era of good feelings for a reason. Uh, there wasn't really much polarization in the country. Everything was, uh, you know, things were going pretty well. There wasn't a huge lot of division in the country at that time over major issues. That doesn't last, of course, and now we get into a real fun one. 1824. Oh boy. Because the Federalists are gone by this point, but you've got Andrew Jackson, John Quincy Adams, William Harris Crawford, and Henry Clay. I'm not a huge fan of Henry Clay, um, but I'm I'm kind of torn with Andrew Jackson and John Quincy Adams because like the how do you feel on those two? Who would you pick in that one?
Well, I understand the appeal of Andrew Jackson, but sensibly, Quincy Adams seems to make more sense because he seems to have, like, he's pretty much the ending of the merging of the Federalists and the Democratic Republican.
Yeah,
Like, we all, like, it started with them being like complete opposites. And at this point, now literally the son of the only Federalist president is now a Democratic Republican. So he's pretty much the evolution of getting the correct parts of both of their platforms. Whereas Jackson seems a bit, he's a populist, yes, but he's a bit more radical in some areas that are just, no, thank you.
yeah, like the slavery thing, and then like we also know he was definitely an expansionist, and those definitely really make me uncomfortable. But Jackson was, he really was the first one to actually fun, the first candidate to really propose getting rid of all property qualifications for voting. And actually, he was an advocate for abolishing the electoral college, which is something we really need to do nowadays. We should have taken his advice then. Uh, so I'm gonna say I'd give a troubled vote to Andrew Jackson in that one. Uh, like with the vice president, like the only maybe Crawford. Um, I know Martin Van Buren was a supporter of Crawford in that election, so that might have been a maybe a good compromise candidate there. So I'd vote for the guy who got 11% of the vote, just because I'm so torn about the other two. But yeah,
But I think we can all agree Henry Clay sucks.
amen. Henry
He ran
Clay's
for president multiple times and didn't win once.
yeah, it's like I don't. He's the only, with the exception of like Rufus King, who we talked about earlier. I don't think any other major contender for the president has ever done as poorly as Henry Clay. And Clay also threw
Well,
that.
in the future, we almost got one. Like there was Harold Stassen, who was major, but by the time he ran like the ninth or 10th time,
Yeah,
he wasn't on anybody's mind anymore.
yeah, he really wasn't. Um, I'm just thinking, like in the vice presidential part though, definitely not John C. Calhoun, and he was also a compromise candidate there, because Calhoun was one of the few people that didn't just argue slavery was a necessary evil. He thought it was a positive good. Uh, so his but he was supported by both Adams and Jackson, which is just weird. But let's move to 1828. Uh, and now we're finally back to a polarized party system with the Democratic Party and the National Republican Party. And I was actually writing a paper on this one not that long ago. I always thought Jackson was the founder of the Democratic Party. It was actually Van Buren.
Yeah, well, Jackson was there.
Well, yeah, like it was founded to support his candidacy, but Van Buren, was the one that actually got it going, which was interesting. But here I would say I'd go ahead and vote for Jackson here, mainly because of the issue of expanded voting rights. You know, that would be the main one. And then also the tariff of 1848 or 1828 was pretty, like, it was very much, it hurt, working class people more than it hurt the elites. So I would go with Andrew Jackson in that one because Quincy Adams was very much moving back into the Federalist mold and really advocating a more elitist brand of politics. So
I probably would have stuck with Quincy Adams, but I I would have tried to, like, let's say I was around in the time period, I would have tried to pressure Adams to like say, hey, we can't just throw away everything about Jackson because this, and this are bad.
yeah,
Let's look at some of his things and maybe adopt it into this new party. Why not?
yeah. I
But,
think
but
I
I
think
probably would have stuck with Adams because Jackson just seems a bit too
insane.
gun gun ho. Like,
Yeah.
it just doesn't seem like perfect.
Oh well, the man was an absolute nutcase. Like I don't even remember how many people they've said he killed. Some say it was only like 10 in duels, but others say it was in the hundreds. And like he would call duels over like a million things. So he was just kind of he was just kind of crazy. And you know why they called him Old Hickory, right?
Because he'd beat people with his cane.
Yeah, his hickory cane. He beat them with his hickory cane. He was a nut. But like expanded democracy
Like,
is yeah,
if he ironed some of that out, then I would have probably been like, okay, now you got me, dude.
yeah. Uh, Now we move to 1832 with the first election with third parties, where and actually I would actually have been more favorable to vote for Jackson in this one, to be honest. Even though there was the Indian Removal Act, which really would have makes me sick to my stomach. It was an act of genocide, but he did replace John C. Calhoun with Martin Van Buren, and Van Buren was actually pretty cool. So I would have voted for Jackson in that one because his opponents there were Henry Clay of the National Republicans, John Floyd of the Nullifiers, and William Wirt of the Anti-Masonic Party, which is weird because Wirt was a Mason, yet was nominated by the anti-Masonic Party, which is just
Well, he was technically a former Mason.
yeah, but he didn't actually agree with their the platform anti-Freemasonry. His whole thing was, I'm against Andrew Jackson and I don't like Henry Clay. The end. And then the nullifiers were just
Yeah, this
weird. But
this might make you mad, but I probably would have voted for Clay, but not particularly due to Clay himself.
yeah,
Just by looking at the National Republican Party, I'm like, I guess technically I agree with his party just a little bit more
yeah,
because the Democrats were at that time were what many black conservatives like to say now, like, well, they were the founders of, they were the ones who kept slavery and blah blah blah. Like
well,
this was before Democrats started getting a lot more better.
yeah,
Like they had a populist streak, yeah, but super gung ho on slavery,
yeah.
and the National Republicans were the least. They were at the very least kind of saying, I mean, maybe we might stop expansion. I don't know.
Like eventually we'll get rid of it, but for the time being, like Henry Clay was a slave owner himself. The only one in this election that wasn't a slave owner was William Wirt of the Anti-Masonic Party, and you know the rest of them were all slave owners, especially Floyd, who was he's from South Carolina, so of course he was a slave owner. But
And the funny thing is, Wirt actually didn't even technically want to run.
he
What he
didn't. Yeah,
wanted was he wanted to get the National Republican Party nomination so that he'd have a chance. But
yeah,
as soon as he didn't get it, he was like, "You can vote for me, but this is nothing."
yeah. Quincy Adams actually also wanted to run for the Anti-Masonic Party in that one, but they were like, "Yeah, no, you're not popular enough." So they went with Wirt, who is the Attorney General, the former Attorney General. So I guess yeah, that was a weird election. I want to just talk about the nullifiers for a minute, though. Like they're just a really weird political movement in American history because you know what their whole thing was, right? Or
Yeah, I talked about them briefly,
yeah.
but give the audience a bit of a refresher.
So yeah, like the nullifiers, their whole thing was basically uh, the states should have the right to overturn any law put forward by the federal government. In particular, they were mad about tariffs, and also, they were very protective of slavery because they were absolute nutcases. Uh, and they were supported by John C. Calhoun. Uh, of course, they were basically just a South Carolina movement, but they had some support elsewhere in the South. But their whole thing was, slavery great, you know, federal government bad. That was their whole. They kind of remind me a bit of, like the sovereign citizens. Those guys today.
Yeah, that's actually just what I was thinking. Like while you were describing them again, I'm like, this is kind of like sovereign citizens.
Yeah, they think, oh well, we have the right to overturn any law that we don't like because, man, they're just weird. But yeah, I would have gone with Jackson in that one because one of the things he was proposing in that was getting rid of the electoral college, which you know, any congressman watching this one, hey, get to work on that. But let's go to 1836 now with the election of the four Whigs against Martin Van Buren. You have Martin Van Buren, William Henry Harrison, Hugh White, Daniel Webster, and Willie P. Mangum. I don't know. No one remembers him. But yeah, it was
Magnum, I
Magnum.
think.
That's got an N in there, so I think it's Mang. Yeah, no one remembers him, and for good reason. But I actually really like Martin Van Buren. He is an underrated president, in my opinion, so I would give him my vote in that one. Uh, but you want to vote for one of the four Whigs?
I personally, I think I might have voted for Daniel Webster.
Hmm.
Out of all the candidates, he seemed to be the only one that actually talked about abolishing slavery.
Yeah.
Though Daniel Webster wasn't like future guys who we'll get to when we get to them. He was actually at least acknowledging, hey, maybe we should think about abolishing slavery, giving himself enough wiggle room to be like, hey, I'm not saying abolish them, but I'm saying we should probably think about abolishing them.
Yeah,
But he just seems the at least the best out of the four Whigs. I think if anything, the Whigs shouldn't have done this strategy and should have just went with Webster
they,
because he's
yeah,
probably the strongest.
yeah. I think you're right on that because their strategy was kind of weird. It was, we're going to run four candidates in different parts of the country. So, Webster in New England, Harrison in the West, Tyler in, kind of Appalachia, and then, or not Tyler, White in Appalachia, and then Mangum in the South. And like they didn't actually, they still lost the popular vote and the electoral vote, but it was kind of a weird strategy. Like it made it very confusing for to you know understand who you were actually voting for with it.
It seems it seems that their plan was that they were trying to make it so that at least three Whigs would make it into the top three, so that the
Yeah,
House of Representatives could vote for one of the Whigs. Because at the time, the House was, I think, dominated by Whigs,
I think you're right
or
near
at
the
least they
end.
were strong enough to have a vote.
Yeah, and also they thought like they definitely had a lot of sway within the House bureaucracy. With Clay was still a very powerful operator within the House of Representatives, so they could have used his influence there, but they thought they could have had a repeat of 1824, I guess. But, Van Buren obviously won. So now we're on to finally when the Whigs take over in 1840. Now, Van Buren kind of, failed on his own merits there. He did, like, Jackson was really responsible for the panic that kind of sunk his own presidency, but, uh, you know, I don't think I would vote for Van Buren in this one, but I also don't think I'd vote for Harrison. Uh, Mainly because I know what happens in the end with him, and it's kind of hilarious. But you know, so I'm actually going to go with my first third party vote. I'm going to vote for James Burney of the Liberty Party.
Same here.
Yeah, uh, their very fervent Protestantism does great on me, but slavery, disgusting. Burney was definitely the
This
strongest
is the
choice.
first time slavery was actually somewhat of an important issue.
Yeah, it really was. He was the first major candidate to actually say immediate abolition. Uh, so I definitely would have gone with James Burney in that one. Uh, he didn't actually campaign at all in that election because he was in England for most of it because he was at a anti-slavery convention there. But it was they didn't do too badly. But they actually later got a bit of influence after the election through a guy you had previously said you'd vote for on here, John Quincy Adams, while he was in the House. Yeah. So yeah, but let's get on to 1844, and here comes the old guy again. Here comes Clay again. Just why? How many times are we on with Clay? 4, 5?
Yeah, I think four.
Yeah. He keeps trying. This was the closest one he got to, though. He did actually nearly. He came within a few thousand votes of actually winning this one. But I'm not gonna even really look at Polk again because I'm going again with the Liberty Party. I'm going with James Burney from Michigan, even though I'm
Yeah,
apologies to my twin sister who lives in Ohio, but I'm gonna vote for the candidate from Michigan. Like they're this was a very effective election. They proved themselves a very effective party in that one, uh, and they some say that they may have sunk the election for Henry Clay, uh, but
well, yeah, but some people also say that Joseph Smith's candidacy would have been successful here. We don't know that.
isn't the Mormon prophet or
Yeah, he ran in this election.
really?
Yeah,
Oh, he
you
did.
can check.
Oh my God, he did. Yeah. Uh, he proposed the abolition of slavery through compensation by selling public lands and decreasing the size and salary of Congress, closure of prisons, annexation of Texas and Oregon and other parts of Canada, uh, free trade, and the reestablishment of a national bank. So basically, a weird hybrid of the Whig and Democratic platforms. But yeah, so okay, wow, yeah, that's surprising. I didn't even know that. Oh wait, no, he didn't actually. his campaign ended before the election though, because he was killed during the election.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
I know. He.
I feel like I probably shouldn't
Yeah,
be
I know
laughing at
that.
that one because I have some good friends that are Mormon, but I like it's. I mean, I don't see a whole lot of uh, people saying saint what I'm Catholic. I don't
Was.
think any saints ran for president, so it's just a little funny to me. But whatever. Uh, yeah, but like Polk was Polk. I'm not a huge fan of because his whole thing was based on manifest destiny, and I'm that's that was imperialism. So
Give Polk the benefit of the doubt. He did a campaign promise, and then when he did it, he just he followed through with a promise.
you are right there.
He wanted to annex Texas, and then when it happened, he's like, "Okay, my job's done. I don't need to run anymore."
Yeah, you're right. He did acknowledge that one. So he also wanted to take over much of Canada, although they ultimately just agreed on Oregon territory and Washington and Oregon, which are pretty nice states. So I'll give him credit for that one. So now on to 1848, where we're Zachary Taylor, Lewis Cass, and Martin Van Buren. We're on the same page, aren't we? Van Buren.
Mm. Oh
Really?
no, no!
Really?
I think I would have probably voted for the Liberty Party
Well,
candidate again,
really?
Smith, because Van Buren during this election he didn't actually campaign on abolition.
Hmm.
He campaigned on the compromise of, oh, eventual abolition. We're going to stop the expansion of slavery. It isn't until the next election where the Free Soil Party starts getting into actual abolition.
I mean, true, yeah. Like, what was his? Uh, Parker Hale. John Parker Hale was the initial nominee for the Liberty Party in that one, but then when he went to form the Free Soil Party, he lost the nomination to Van Buren. Uh, but I personally would have still voted for Van Buren in that one because I felt like it was just a more practical option of promoting that goal of free soil and eventual abolition. So I'm going with a bit more of the weirdly because you're more moderate than me in your politics. You're a social democrat, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, and I'm
to an extent, yeah.
yeah, and I'm a full on democratic socialist. I believe in revolution and all that. So, but it's weird. I'm actually taking the more moderate route. So yeah, I'm going free soil. You're going liberty. But then on to 1852, and now we're getting Parker Hale is the nominee for the Liberty Party in this one, and he's a straight up abolitionist. So I'm obviously going to be supporting him. But I'll tell you who I'm absolutely not voting for in this one. Jacob Broom of the Native American Party, in quotations on Native American, aka the Know Nothings. So yeah, like they would have hated me because I'm a Catholic. So yeah, you're just they embrace the like they. Mr. Beat did get this one wrong in his video where he said that they were called that because people said that they knew nothing. Well, the actual reason they were called that was because they were formed out of a secret society, and when asked about it, they always would answer, "I know nothing." Uh, But, still, it's just a hilarious name that they openly embraced for their party, the Know Nothings. So, just weird.
There's one thing that they knew nothing about. There's one thing they knew nothing about: how to win an election.
Very, very, very true. They did not. Like, I thought this was actually the one that they ran Fillmore in previously until I, did a little bit more reading on it. And I was surprised to find out that Fillmore was an awful president. He didn't even run for re-election in this one. They instead nominated Winfield Scott, another Mexican American war general, and based on this picture, a guy with a bit of an appetite. So yeah, and then Pierce, which is a rather unremarkable president. So yeah, it was kind of a washout election, but Hale would be my candidate in that one, and I'm assuming yours too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, But that's going to be the last time that we were going to be able to support the Free Soilers because next up it's 1856, and now it's time for the Republicans to come along. And this one we've got. Oh, just bumped my mic there. We have got. Let me scroll down. We've got Buchanan from the Democrats, Fremont from the Republicans, and Fillmore from the American Party, the Know Nothings. And free soil, free men, Fremont. That I'm going with Fremont. So
Yeah, this is something that I don't get to say quite often, but I probably would have voted
voted Republican.
the Republican in this one.
Yeah, I would.
Would have stuck with Fremont. He just makes sense.
Yeah, he was he was pretty cool. His views on Western expansion are not some that I fully embrace, but his big issue there was was slavery. And obviously, I'm not voting for Buchanan because he is easily the worst president in U.S. history. So,
And he's also gay.
was he?
Maybe.
Oh,
Maybe.
I'll have to look into that one. But yeah, that's not a reason to not vote for him. But he was just an awful president. He was, he thought he was going to be the last president in U.S. history. But then also, I am from Kansas, and there was basically a war going on here during that time. John Brown and all that was going on.
There's speculation about how Buchanan's got
Hello? I can't hear you. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, it cut out, but yeah. So let's go on to 1860 and that crazy election. And you're from the South, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. So I'm
from the great Tar Heel state.
Tar Heel State. That is. I should know this one. Okay, just tell me. The Tar Heel State.
North Carolina.
Okay, North Carolina. I apologies. I was in North. The last time I was in North Carolina, I was 4, I think. So, yeah. So I'm assuming that you're going with Breckenridge.
Well, obviously, I mean, slavery, sign me up for that.
Yeah.
Well, technically, I didn't have the either option that I would have went for. Neither of them were on the ballot in NC. But
Douglas.
in a hypothetical scenario, I would have voted for Abraham Lincoln
Yeah.
in Pretend Land.
Yeah. I'm taking that you would have gone with, had you actually been voting there, you probably would have voted for John Bell, because he was the only other one on the ballot down there. But I would have voted for Lincoln.
Maybe.
Yeah. I would have voted for.
Hold on, give me a second.
Oh yeah.
Hold on, give me a second. Give me 1 second.
Yeah.
Hey, girl!
I'm busy. I'm busy. I'm busy.
Family. Family.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been trying to keep them quiet as well. So, yeah. It's the holiday season. So, yeah. But in 1860, I would have voted for Lincoln also. But I actually would have preferred some of his the other candidates in that in the Republican running, because Lincoln was nominated because he was moderate, and there was, I would have wanted a bit more of a radical candidate there, but it's still easily would have voted for Lincoln. Because he was the only one that was saying let's not expand slavery elsewhere, and I don't even get what Douglas's deal was. He really wanted to be president, and I think that was about it.
Douglas's deal was that he wanted slavery, but also not, but
Yeah,
also yes,
yeah.
maybe.
Let the people choose slavery. I'd vote no on it, but they should have a choice. That was basically his whole view on it, which I get. Like, I'm all for the idea of popular sovereignty, but you know, and there are some like red lines, and slavery is one of them. And also, he died not long after the election. I know that. So yeah, but on
And
today,
John Bell was do nothing.
yeah, it was the Union as it is, the Constitution as it
John Bell's
is.
whole strategy is just literally do nothing.
Yeah, it literally like he wasn't the know nothing candidate. He was the do nothing candidate. So yeah. But then 1864, I would, had they stuck around, I probably would have voted for the radical Republicans in that one. But then, of course, they, dropped out and decided to just endorse Lincoln. And this is the first time that my state gets to vote in it. So I would have voted for Lincoln easily in that one. Because McClellan's whole deal was he was in favor of the war. The only reason that he ran was because he was mad at Lincoln for firing him, because he was kind of an incompetent general.
It's the thing about him. It seems he tried to be both a cottonmouth Democrat, and I think that's the right term, and a peace one. Like he wanted to be both war and peace, so
Yeah,
it was a
Cottonmouths and
little
Copperheads. Yeah,
strange.
yeah. The Cottonmouths were the war Democrats. The Copperheads were the peace Democrats. So yeah, but yeah, like he was personally more of a war Democrat, but they gave him a peace platform, um, which is just boo. Uh, the one issue I would have but because the Radical Democracy Party and Fremont dropped out, Fremont, another general that Lincoln had fired, um, I I probably would have been planning to vote for him, but then come election day, I would have just voted for Lincoln because they were calling for the emancipation of slavery, building the transcontinental railroad, and defeating the Confederacy, which yay. Uh, and
Yeah, pretty much the same.
yeah, and a big part of the reason that Lincoln won that election was because of good old Uncle Billy, General Sherman. Torched Atlanta to the ground, and that one of the few times where you can burn a city to the ground and then win an election. Like, I mean, yeah, but McClellan was just kind of in it to get personal revenge, had no real intent of actually winning. But then let's get to 1868. Now, here's. Like, in this one, you had only two candidates, really. It was Grant, the war hero, versus Horatio Seymour, who's. I will say this for Seymour. He had one really good part of his platform, which was he wanted to pay off the war debts using greenbacks, uh, which was a pretty good policy, in my opinion. Uh, but I wouldn't want a Democratic administration because I would have wanted a very strong Reconstruction. Uh, and the Democrats explicitly campaigned on an anti-black platform, so I would have voted for Grant.
Yeah, same here. I probably would have
Yeah,
voted Grant this time around.
yeah. One of the few times that I can say with all honesty I would have voted for a Republican, which I would not do today. But you know, like in the main attack against Grant was that he was a drunk, and you know what Lincoln's response to that during the war was?
No, what?
He said that the fact that Grant was drunk actually made him a better general. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, like because
Like,
he was famously roaring drunk whenever he was commanding in the field, uh, and Lincoln just said that is what makes him such a good general.
so does he mean that since he's able to pull all these great strategies while drunk makes him a better general? Is that what he's
I
trying to say?
guess like because he famously reeked of bourbon whenever he was in the field, and also smoked more cigars than Winston Churchill. He basically was America's Winston Churchill when you think about it, with the alcohol and cigar consumption. Um, and he was you know was absolutely like off his ass drunk during battles, and he won. Like, so yeah, like, and that was one of the main hits against him during the 1868 campaign by the Democrats, was that Grant was a drunk, and that the radicals are you know anti-white, I guess. Was it was disgusting on that campaign, but Grant is just such a funny character in American history. uh but let's move on to 1872, and now the issue: you don't actually have a Democrat in this election. You have uh, Horatio, or no, it's not Horatio Seymour. That was the last one. You have Horace Greeley in the Liberal Republican Party. Uh, like that one was like their whole. Do you know much about the Liberal Republicans? Because I'm
Not particularly. I'm pulling up the party right now just
yeah,
to see like what is their deal.
yeah. Like they were against corruption. I know was kind of the big thing, because by this time the radical Republicans were garnering a reputation for really serious corruption. Uh, and the Grant administration was infamous for it. Uh, and like Greeley was a supporter of. Was Charles Sumner in this one? Yeah. Okay. So the one thing they did have was they did have the support of Charles Sumner, who was a radical Republican. Uh, um, but and like one of the things that that Sumner had campaigned on with Thaddeus Stevens was a massive land reform strategy. Uh, but he grew opposed to Grant's reelection, apparently. So, uh, that's interesting. So this
Really,
one,
the only thing that the liberal Republicans are like they're anti-Grant, pretty much.
yeah, pretty much, yeah. But the radicals still were on the side of Grant. And the thing is, despite their corruption, the one issue is the radicals were calling for a continuation of Reconstruction, and the liberal Republicans were not. They wanted to end it, so I'm going with Grant anyways, because I wanted, I Reconstruction. I think it ended way too early, so I think that it was good. And obviously we know Horace Greeley dies before the electoral votes are cast, although he still gets 3 electoral votes for reasons. Uh, so I'm gonna go with Grant again, anyways, despite the corruption, and that is a phrase you are not gonna hear me say again on here. Uh, how about you?
Since I'm a little cheater, I'm gonna say I'm gonna vote for Victoria Woodhull of the Equal Rights Party,
Oh, is this?
who's the first woman candidate to run for president.
Was she running this
She
one?
was arrested. She did run, but since she was a woman, it didn't really count. It
Yeah,
wasn't legal, and anybody who voted for her was arrested. Well, I mean, she was arrested for trying to vote for herself,
yeah,
but pretty much it would have just been a protest vote against Grant for
yeah.
his corruption.
That one. Oh, that's better choice. I want to steal that one, but I've already made my bed, so now I have to sleep in it. Which reminds me, I need to make my bed. Um, but yeah,
As Jordan Peterson once said.
yeah. So now we're on to 1876, and this is one of the ones that the Electoral College screwed up. We're up against Hayes and Tilden. Um, but then we also have the Greenback Party, the Prohibition Party, and the American National Party, which was just a continuation of the Anti-Masonic Party. So we got a few here. Um, you go first.
I probably would have backed the Greenback Party because they were trying to do a bunch of currency reform and were pretty much the precursor to the People's Party.
Yeah.
So it just seems like they were the most aligned with me. And this is kind of the first like election where things started to get like where the traditional left right dynamic was starting to be used in a sense
Yeah.
with the greenbacks. At one point, there was Wikipedia identified them as a Democratic Socialist Party, I think,
Yeah.
but that doesn't really
Makes sense.
particularly count.
Yeah. I agree with you. They were anti-monopoly. They wanted currency reform, and they were in favor of the nascent labor movement, and they were aligned with groups like the Grange. So I would definitely be supportive of them because they were the first party to really throw their lot in with the urban working class. So and that's really the constituency that I care about the most. So I'm going with them as well. The Greenback Party is who I'm giving my vote for there. So I'm moving away from the Democrats and the Republicans. So let's move on to 1880 with James Garfield, who, can I just say, his beard was immaculate. Um, and Winfield Scott Hancock, a candidate no one remembers. And then on the others, we have, of course, James B. Weaver of the Greenback Party, Neil Dow of the Prohibition Party, and the Anti-Masonic Party has John W. Phelps. We're going Greenback, aren't we?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, yeah, the Republicans at this point are like Reconstruction's over. The Republicans are now basically just a party of the the business class. The Democrats are the party of farmers and ranchers, and no one's really representing the working class. So I'm going with the Greenback Party easily. Uh, so yeah, because was Weaver in Congress by that point, or yeah, Weaver was
I
actually in Congress. Yeah,
Yeah, so he actually had a chance to make a name for himself among lefties.
yeah. He received 3.3% of the vote, which was three times what they did in what they did in the last election. So that was pretty good. So there was definitely a movement growing there. Now we get into 1884 with the who are we here? We've got Grover Cleveland of the Democrats, James Blaine of the Republicans, John St. John of the Prohibition Party from my home state of Kansas, and Benjamin Franklin Butler of the Greenback and Anti-Monopoly parties. Again, I think you're going with it. I obviously have to go with my home state and go with the Prohibition Party. No, I'm just kidding. I actually kind of like Scotch right now. No, I'm going with Butler. Like, yeah,
Yeah, I would stick with Butler. He does have some. I did learn later he did have some iffiness on some things like it seems that he was no wait I think like he did seem to support John C. Breckinridge at one point, but I'm like, well, I'm just gonna say he grew up at this point, and if he's gonna be part of the this party, I would rarely say he probably grew up on some of his more bad racial views back in the day.
yeah. Like he was anti-abolition in his younger years. He at the 1860 convention for the Democrats, he initially supported Breckinridge, but then he shifted to Jefferson Davis, who was more moderate than Breckinridge, oddly enough. I will say this for Jefferson Davis, though. He did have one really good idea that he supported while he was Secretary of War: the United States Camel Corps. Yeah, I saw the Knowing Better video on the Camel Corps, and I'm just like, okay, that's awesome. Um, but yeah, he was a supporter of Breckinridge and Jefferson Davis, but he did serve in the Union during the war itself, though. So, and like actually during it, he was very into seizing cotton from the plantation owners, although that did lead to his recall as a general. And then he, reformed after that to, support more progressive goals. So Butler, problematic nominee, but I'm going with him anyway. Yeah. Into 1888, Cleveland loses his reelection, and in this one we have no more Greenback Party, but we have the Union Labor Party and Alson Streeter, and Clinton B. Fisk of the Prohibition Party, and of course the incumbent Grover Cleveland, the Democrat. You want to go with Union Labor?
Yeah, it seems that even though there's not that much info on the Union Labor Party,
Yeah,
one, Union and Labor, I mean, hello. And second, it does seem that they are the evolution of the Greenback Party
yeah, they really were.
and the Anti Monopoly Party,
Yeah,
even though there's like zero info on them because
there
this
was.
was it. This
Yeah,
was it, their one election.
yeah, you're right. And Streeter was a very, he was an Illinois politician, and they didn't get much in the way of the votes. But I definitely would have, gone with Streeter because I'm actually wearing my Union T-shirt today. I've done some union organizing in the past, so like, that's definitely going to be, that's an issue I care about very deeply. So I would want that one because the only difference between Harrison and Cleveland on anything else was on tariff policy. Uh, and I do know this on Harrison. One of the ways he actually won the election was he was able to pull Irish voters away from the Democrats because at the time they were saying that free trade was a British policy because that was the policy being promoted by Britain at the time. So they just appealed to Irish nationalism to win the election, which good on Harrison. But I'm going with the Union Labor Party. So yeah. So 1892, and now we got the populists. So we're voting for the populists, aren't we?
The People's Party, yes, but known colloquially as the
Yeah,
Populists.
yeah. They're listed on Wikipedia as the populists for reasons unknown, but yeah. Although I do want to give a shout out to Simon Wing of the Socialist Labor Party because at that time they weren't, a Deleonist sect. Uh, that was the first, explicitly socialist presidential candidacy. And he was also not, not an idiot. He was a camera inventor too. But I believe their whole platform was they wanted to abolish the presidency, uh, which
Yeah, they're Adam Kokesh, except for socialists.
pretty much, yeah. Which I personally like the parliamentary model a bit more, so I'm gonna, shout out to them, but I'm gonna go with a more practical candidate and vote for the People's Party here. I'm gonna vote for Weaver, who we both previously voted for here, um, over Cleveland and over Harrison, because their whole thing is, the gold standard, which was ridiculous. So, yeah. Uh, but then we get into 1896, and now we don't get a. Well, we can still on this one. William James Bryan is nominated by the People's Party and the Democratic Party, but with a different running mate on each one. You have Charles Matchett of the Socialist Labor Party. You have John M. Palmer of the National Democratic Party. William McKinley as the Republican. And then Charles Eugene Bentley of the National Prohibition Party, which is basically the Prohibition Party, but they also supported free silver. So I assume you're going to go with Bryan.
Yeah, I'm gonna. He's a Southern populist. Of course, I have to vote for him.
I thought,
I think he's Southern,
no, he's from Nebraska.
or he was a Midwesterner. Same
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, he's from the state.
Midwesterners and Southerners have similar viewpoints.
Hey! That's Those are fighting words. But which ticket would you vote for him on? Would you vote for him on the Democratic ticket with Arthur Sewell or the People's ticket with Thomas E. Watson from Maine or Georgia there? And
I probably would at least give him a vote on the Populist Party one ballot
yeah.
monthly, though Thomas Watson kind of went on the deep end a little later,
Oh yeah,
but he's not crazy yet.
yeah. Like at this time, he was still campaigning against lynching and saw white supremacy as a way of dividing, a way for the elite to divide people. But then later he becomes this self-identified white supremacist, a denouncer of socialism, and he believes that the cities are being controlled by the Catholic Church. And also, he becomes also a vehement anti-Semite. So he goes absolutely insane later on. But yeah, I would also be voting for him in that one. But again, I would be a little interested in Matchett, who was a much lower lower on the list of candidates. He only received 0.26% of the vote. But the socialist ideas are worth having. And like Eugene Debs, I think Eugene Debs was he was a candidate at the People's Party convention, and I actually have a picture of him on my wall. So uh, like Debs ultimately voted for Bryan in that one, so I would go with him. And Debs was converted to socialism by that point. But let's get to 1900, and we're back to McKinley versus Bryan, but Debs has arrived on the scene, and but also you've got some other nominations because Bryan is also nominated by like the Anti-Imperialist League, but you've also got the Populists nominating Wharton Barker as their own candidate. They've broken with Bryan, and you've got the Socialist Labor Party again. So who are you voting for here? Sticking with Bryan or?
Personally, I'm torn between Bryan and Debs. Like, I honestly can't choose which one of the two to vote for. So I'm just gonna cheat here, and you'll be getting some of that in the future. I'll be saying these two. Like these two, I really can't decide between.
I'm going all in on Debs. That's a real shock there. I identify very much with him politically. He was clearly the best. I think he was, one of the best politicians we've ever had in American history. So I'm going all the way in with Debs because Bryan, well, he was right on this free silver issue. He was wrong on a lot of other issues. He was a prohibitionist, and that's just I'm not into that. you know. Again, I kind of want a scotch right now, so yeah. But McKinley is assassinated right after this one in September of 1901. So in the 1904 one, we're up against Theodore Roosevelt, some guy named Parker, Alton Parker, who's a chief judge of the New York Court of Appeals, and then we've got Debs, and then Thomas E. Watson is back, and he is utterly insane. Okay, are we back? Hello? Okay, give me a sec there. Okay. Okay, sorry, we just lost our call. Okay, hold up one sec, everybody. Okay, sorry. One sec, guys. We'll be back in. Fernando. Start call. Okay, there we go. Okay. Okay, sorry, dude. We lost our connection there for a minute.
Okay, then.
Yeah, sorry. My Wi-Fi messed up, so we lost the connection. So we're back in. We're at 1904. That's where we were.
So did you get the candidates that I said, or?
I did not hear them now. My Wi-Fi cut out just at that moment. I don't know what's up, but yeah. So Roosevelt, Parker, Debs, Watson. You're going with Watson, aren't you?
Well, obviously, his white supremacy just hits a chord with me being a Hispanic person. So, in all seriousness, I honestly, again, I'm kind of torn between two candidates. Roosevelt and Debs, they both come from different left wing flavors. One being more of a obviously the Roosevelt style progressive, and Debs being well a socialist.
Yeah.
I see both of them with their ups and their downs. So it just depends. Like, if I wanted to be ideological, I'd vote Debs, but you know, I could still be ideological and want to win with Roosevelt.
Yeah. My reasoning for not wanting to support Roosevelt is firstly his imperialist outlook on things. He wanted, expansion, the whole Panama situation and all that. But then the other thing is his view was very much based more on preserving liberalism. Well, I do genuinely believe in we need to move beyond capitalism. So obviously, I'm going to go towards Debs because Roosevelt was advocating trust busting. Debs was advocating nationalization. And personally, I think that's a uh, better option. So I'm going with Debs easily. But I probably would have actually given Roosevelt my second choice vote if they had ranked choice voting back then, just because the Democrats were campaigning more on a classical liberal type platform, and I'm not into that. So and their candidate was a follower of the Cleveland faction, anyway. So 1908, William Howard Taft, the guy who didn't want to be president. William James Bryan, the guy who keeps trying. Uh, the Eugene V. Debs, Eugene Chafin of the Prohibition Party. Have we come across him before, actually? Uh, Higskin of the
No.
Independence Party. And, of course, we got Watson again. Who's... So, yeah, we've got Higskin, who is a fan of, I want to say, Hearst. So, how did they not do better in that one with all of Hearst's money? But, I'm going... I'm going for Debs again. Are you going for Bryan?
Similar to 1900, torn between Bryan and Debs. Bryan, he's like you can tell by his picture, he's losing some of his style and sheen and starts getting to the point where he goes a little off the deep end with the scope stuff,
Yeah, he's getting
but he still has a good streak so far.
yeah,
But I mean, at this point, I'd probably be a little more leaning on Debs.
yeah. Like Brian's central issue was the free silver issue, and that one's kind of growing increasingly irrelevant. So now it's all about monopolies and what's the future of capitalism. So I'm going with Debs because I don't think capitalism deserves a future. Uh, and this was not a bad election showing for Debs, but it's not as good as the next one we're getting to. 1912. Oh boy. Uh, yeah. Do you watch the Cynical Historian at all?
I think I've watched a bit of him, but
Yeah.
not frequently.
Well, then you would know if he was on here, he would be going Wilson. Yeah. Wilson was. Oh God, he was not. He is not one of my favorite presidents for a myriad of reasons. And obviously, I'm going with Debs. This was his best election showing. Actually, one of the counties he actually carried was in Kansas. It was Crawford County, where Girard is. And so I'm, you know, like that one is, it's a couple hours south of where I am. I'm in Johnson County, but uh, that's pretty cool. And so I'm going with Debs, and he also had probably his best running mate with Emil Seidel, who was the mayor of Milwaukee. So he actually has an elected official on his ticket this time. You know, but are you going to go with a pragmatic route, or are you torn again?
Again, torn. I mean, I give Debs the benefit of the doubt. He came in second place in Florida and he won 4 counties, but Roosevelt won states.
Yeah, yeah.
So
You know, he,
I'm just saying he did better here than you did, Debs.
yeah,
Gotta pick up the pace.
yeah. He like there's this great cartoon on it on here, which was Roosevelt was very espousing a very radical notion in this. Like actually some of the things like the first proposals for single payer health care in the United States actually came out of Roosevelt's campaign. And like he was actually accused of stealing Debs's platform by some of the newspapers that were supporting Taft or Wilson. But it's he I will give him that. He did have some good policies on it. I'm just not sure that he was as trustworthy as I would be going with because he still considered himself to be both a progressive and a conservative at the time. If you read some of his letters, so I'm gonna stick with Debs, and also I'm a member of the DSA, and they're descended from the Socialist Party, so I got a bit of a brand loyalty thing there. But then 1916, and here one of the biggest issues is the war. So do you go with he kept us out of the war, let's be prepared for the war, or the Socialist Party's platform of let's ban intervention unless the people vote on it?
Well, considering I know that keeping us out of war was BS, I'm gonna go with Alan L. Benson because he actually at least was consistent in his policy, and
Until,
plus,
well, actually,
left wing.
well, he did actually just become one of he embraced social patriotism actually after the U.S. entered the war. Yeah, he supported the war
Well,
effort.
yeah, but that's after the war.
Well, that's true. Yeah, his like Wilson was always a charlatan, but that actually did cost the Democrat or the Socialists quite a bit of support because Benson didn't campaign like Debs did. He just wanted to use his newspapers to promote his candidacy, while Debs would do things like whistle stop, and that just destroyed their their vote totals there. And Debs is, as you said in your video on it, Debs was running for Congress in that one. Also, Debs was in pretty bad health by that point. He was known to work himself a little tired, and when I say tired, I mean he had several bouts of extreme exhaustion, and his wife was telling him not to run for president again because she was convinced he was gonna die if he did. Um, but yeah, I would also have voted for Benson in that one because again, the war. I don't think that Benson was right that we should have a referendum before we go to war. Like that's just a little, you know, out there in my opinion, but I can see the appeal of it at the time.
Well, I mean, it makes the most sense than having some people in a big room who don't have to go fight in the war.
I mean, yeah.
If you're gonna say go to war, at least have the people who might get drafted to go to that war make the decision.
I mean, you got a point there. It's just it's a little impractical, but I at the time it would have like that war was until World War II. It was the single most destructive war in human history. So like I can see why they would want to like do anything and everything to stay out of it. So Benson would have been the best choice there. Hughes was kind of trying. Hughes was like the last person that anyone thought would be nominated for president, but he kind of was just chosen because they wanted to bring the progressives back into the fold. So, you know,
Yeah, he was the compromise candidate. He was the, I guess you could say, Liz Warren.
yeah,
Like, hey, they can appeal to both the establishment wing and the progressive wing.
yeah, that's a good
I
analogy
mean,
for it. Yeah,
yeah, but we wanted the hardcore progressive. Like,
yeah,
yeah, but we wanted hardcore progressive. How
I mean,
about Hughes?
yeah, like I would have, if the only progressive Republican that I really actually of the era that I'm really somewhat of a fan of is La Follette, and had he been the nominee for the like he didn't support the Progressive Party, which I thought was kind of a weird thing. You mentioned that in your video, right? Or was that a Mr. Beat video that I got that one?
Yeah, he didn't support the first one. He didn't support the first one
Yeah,
because he was like, well, because him and Roosevelt didn't like each other,
yeah,
and he was like, you're just doing this to boost your own ego.
yeah. Which may have been right, but like it was. I would have trusted him because he was a genuine social reformer. Uh, but obviously, in 1916, we're both going for Benson because of the war. Although a lot of people didn't like W.E.B. Du Bois actually left the Socialist Party to vote for Wilson because he was convinced that Wilson would keep him out of the war and that he knew it was going to be so close. So yeah. But let's get on to 1920 with Warren G. Harding, James N. Cox, and also we now have Franklin D. Roosevelt on the scene as the vice presidential nominee, which, and also, this is an interesting election because you've got the Irish race conventions and the rise of Irish nationalism, the Black and Tan Wars going on in Ireland. So who's going to recognize the Irish Republic is a surprising issue in the campaign. And actually, all the parties, or the three largest parties, the Republicans, Democrats, and Socialist Party, all endorsed in recognizing the Irish Republic, which is an interesting thing. I think we all know who I'm voting for. Do I really need to say it?
Yes, because someone might not know.
Fair enough. I'm voting for Eugene Debs. I'm voting for, even though he's in a prison cell, I'm voting for him. Uh, but I'm gonna give a quick shout out to Parley P. Christensen of the Farmer Labor Party because that was a novel idea. That they had going. You know, that was a an interesting attempt. It didn't work, but interesting. So you're going for Harding, aren't you? You know.
Well, even though I am kind of slightly torn, it's not entirely. Like, again, I give the shout out to
Yeah.
Christensen, but this election I probably would have been all in on Convict 9653.
Amen. You gotta go. You gotta go with Config 9653. I really need to. I'm bad with numbers, so I would have said that if I had remembered it. But uh, Bernie Sanders actually has a Convict 5693 keychain.
I do know that he has like a Debs stuff on his wall in
Yeah.
his
Well,
Senate office.
yeah, I've seen that. I've been in his office, which he finally got an interior decorator in there. But he on his personal keychain, he has a with his house keys and everything, he has a convict 9653 keychain on there as well. So that's pretty cool. Which I really want to know where to get one of those, but probably can't afford it. But yeah, so we're both going for Debs in that one because his imprisonment was incredibly illegal. Like like I, like the government should not be jailing people for speech. Uh, but now on to 1924. Calvin Coolidge, John W. Davis, Robert M. La Follette, which I'm probably saying his name wrong, and my dad used to live in Wisconsin, so he could probably correct me on that. But then you've also got Herman P. Ferris of the Prohibition Party, William Z. Foster of the Communist Party, and Gilbert Nations of the American Party, which I'm not like. That's a their whole thing was they were not into Catholics, so I'm really not voting for them. Uh, but I think you going for La Follette?
Yeah, La Follette was the clear, like the only major lefty in the technically semantics for
Yeah.
him.
Pardon?
He was the only major lefty because, I mean, come on, who cares?
Yeah, like who even what? Like the Democrat was what was his name again? John W. Davis, the former ambassador to the United Kingdom. Like you know, like there are a lot of presidential losers that we remember. Uh, you know, we remember. We remember Debs. We remember Bryan, but we don't remember John W. Davis. And also in that one, the the Democratic Party failed to pass a amendment to the platform condemning the Ku Klux Klan. So like that's just gross. Although the Klan actually did endorse Calvin Coolidge, though. Yeah,
Ironic,
yeah,
the one who was actually saying I don't like lynching was endorsed by the KKK.
yeah. Like in at least one county in Indiana, I believe that because the Klan basically controlled the state government of Indiana at the time, he was actually listed on at least one ballot as Klan candidate Coolidge with all K's. So that was kind of disturbing, but like La Follette's campaign was really admirable. It was the only time that he brought together, the Socialists, the American Federation of Labor, and a bunch of other left groups behind a single third-party candidacy. It's the closest that we've ever really gotten to having a real workers' party in the United States, which is,
It's actually a strategy that's being done now for the like a Green Party candidate for
Yeah,
president, Howie Hawkins
Howie
is
Hawkins.
trying to
Yeah,
do that again.
yeah. I'm actually Facebook friends with Howie Hawkins. Yeah. I used to be in the Green Party. You know, I might do a video on why I left later on, but there's you know, uh, more power to Howie if he's successful with that endeavor. But uh, let's get on to 1928. So this is the first one in a while that I'm actually torn on. Because I my natural my natural instinct is obviously vote for the Socialist Party in this one. Norman Thomas was was a great man. I absolutely would have supported him, but it's just like with a lot of people who support Hillary Clinton because they wanted the first woman president. Al Smith would have been the first Catholic president, and that would have really mattered, to me. Uh, the one issue I do have with him, though, is he was very closely associated with Tammany Hall, and that was a reason he lost. But would you go for Al Smith in that one, or?
No, no, no. I'm going with Norman Thomas.
Uh,
He just me and him just align the most on policy.
oh yeah, I like I probably would ultimately just cast my vote for Thomas, but I would be a bit more conflicted on this one because it would have been such at that time America, like anti-Semitism, anti-Catholicism, views like that were still very mainstream in the United States. So that would have been just a very historic moment. It would be like, like when Kennedy was elected, it was a massive, step forward. It was the first time Catholics finally really entered the mainstream in the United States. So that's kind of you know I have a bit of a personal agenda there, but I would ultimately go for Norman Thomas. And also, I can probably say that, again, I live in Kansas, like my vote really matters. So, yeah. Uh, but of course, we all know Herbert Hoover winds up winning because, America was so vehemently anti Catholic at the time. So, 32. America's in the Depression. We got a lot of parties here. Who do you go with?
32. I'm gonna have to go with FDR.
You going with FDR?
Yeah, yeah. I just well, for starters, I know some of the things that happened later, so I'm like, FDR probably would have been the best choice in this election. I'm just saying,
Yeah,
you don't know what's going on down the line.
yeah, you got a point there. I'm gonna go with Norman Thomas again, because FDR would definitely have been preferable to Herbert Hoover, who was unable to do anything about the Depression and refused to do anything. Uh, the Depression really was the greatest failure of capitalism, in the history of capitalism. So and that was part of Thomas's whole thing: repeal unemployment and abolish capitalism were kind of some of his main planks. So I would have voted for that because Roosevelt was saying he was a little ambiguous what he meant with the New Deal at the time. So I'm not sure I would really have I could really trust him as much as Thomas, who was a bit clearer on what his plans were. We're going to nationalize the banks. We're going to you know you know he was very clear about some of his goals and ultimately with the transition towards socialism. But Roosevelt would catch my attention. Uh, and then 36. Are you going to stick with Roosevelt?
Hold on. 36 is the one with the Union Party, right?
Yeah, with Lemke.
Well, I'm not gonna vote for Lemke, but if Huey Long would have made it at the end, I would have been at least a bit more torn between Roosevelt, Long, and maybe a bit of Thomas. But I probably would have just stuck with FDR for the most part.
Yeah. My issue with with Huey Long and the Union Party and all that is it's hard to parse out where Huey Long really was. Like he was very it's hard to tell if he was more like he was a populist for sure, but like was left or right is kind of the weird thing because he was definitely advocate of you know economic reform and spreading the wealth and stuff. But was he more of a distributist or was he more of a socialist? Is kind of where I'm unsure of him. I'm gonna stick with Thomas on this one because while I do think the New Deal was in hindsight we know the New Deal was probably the best thing. Again, I think that that was the best chance we would have had to move away from this failed economic system. And that's again where a place where you and I are going to disagree. I am an anti-capitalist. I don't think you are. So I'm going to go with Norman Thomas because I just want to make it clear that we need you know, that the New Deal good and all, but we need to push forward. Uh, but I would,
Thomas, Roosevelt, and Long each had ideas that would have been better, but
yeah,
in the end, who got to do his?
yeah, you're right. Roosevelt did get to do his, and I do feel a little bad for Alf Landon, who was a fellow Kansan, um, who lost his home state. One of the few times that Kansas has voted for a Democrat. Uh, but I'm gonna stick with Norman Thomas because I would have wanted to see capitalism gone. Then 1940, you got Roosevelt, you got Wilkie, who, fun story, I actually know, I think it's his great granddaughter, I believe. I know she's related to him. Back when I was in the Green Party, she was a major volunteer in the Kansas Green Party. But you got Roosevelt, you got Wilkie, you got Thomas, Earl Browder, another guy from Kansas with the Communist Party. Who are you going with? Sticking with Roosevelt? Because now you got Huey Long on the
Yeah,
ticket.
I'm gonna be
Or not,
100% sticking
not
with
Huey Long.
Roosevelt.
Not Huey Long. Henry Wallace on the ticket. Sorry. Uh, God. But yeah.
Yeah, he's got Wallace there,
Yeah.
so best ticket he's had so far.
Yeah. This is one where I'm kind of torn because one of the big things that Thomas was into at that time was non-interventionism. But I personally think that the U.S. should have actually done something to intervene in the Spanish Civil War. Not necessarily send troops, but maybe instead of placing an arms embargo, they should have armed the Republic in the defense of democracy. But Thomas was being a much more anti-interventionist. So I'll go with give my vote to Thomas, but I'm starting to lean a bit more towards Roosevelt because I think Roosevelt was doing Lend-Lease and stuff and making the whole arsenal of democracy thing. So I think that would have been very important. Uh, so I'm getting a bit more torn. So and also he was being increasingly supportive of labor unions, and so that does matter. But I'm gonna stick with Thomas for the time being. Uh, But then let's get to 44, and here I'm finally going to switch my vote. I'm voting for Roosevelt in this one. My rationale being,
Yeah, well, welcome to the club.
yeah, uh, like the big rationale I have for that is, well, Norman Thomas was not. Roosevelt was campaigning on unconditional surrender. Norman Thomas was not. He was saying we're not going to accept negotiations with fascists, but we're not going to push for this unconditional surrender thing. We want this war to end quickly and with fascism gone, but not with the many more dead. And I'm just like, you gotta crush fascism completely. So Roosevelt's the only one doing that. Uh, I'm a little. I have a weird relationship when it comes to Harry Truman, though. He's because I'm from Kansas City and Harry Truman is too. And he was. I've been to the Truman Library many times. My family has close ties with the Truman Library. My psychologist actually knew Harry Truman because my psychologist grew up in Independence, and when he was out playing outside as a boy, he would see Harry Truman on his walks. But Roosevelt wanted Wallace on the ticket, and he didn't trust Truman. Roosevelt didn't trust Truman because he knew Truman was a machine politician. He was known as the senator from Pendergast, who was the local machine boss. Oh, what's that? Did you hear that? Oh, you back?
No,
Okay, sorry. Did you hear me or?
you're quiet now.
Okay, you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, it sounded like you may have cut out for a second there. My Wi-Fi is being weird because there's 5 people in this house. But Harry Truman was he was a machine politician. He came from the Pendergast machine, but he was, a local, he's a local hero down here. Everyone, loves Harry Truman. I like Harry Truman just because of my local upbringing. He's my dad's favorite president, and stuff. But Wallace was probably a better vice president, in my opinion.
Well, I mean, Roosevelt was sick and dying,
Yeah,
so they were able to just be like, "Oh no, this is Wallace.
yeah,
Wallace has Wallace always had glasses and bald? No, no, no. Yeah, this is Wallace."
yeah. Well, Truman didn't trust him because he was a machine politician, and he knew Wallace because they'd been, on the ticket together for quite some time at that point. So, he wanted Wallace to stay on the ticket, but it that didn't work out, obviously.
I think we all would have wanted Wallace to stay on the ticket because then we would have know. Then he would have been president.
Yeah, I, we'll get to Wallace here with the next one, but I'm going for Roosevelt because of the war. I don't think that Thomas was in support of the war enough. But then 48. So here we got Truman, we got Wallace, and we got Debs. So, or not Debs, Thomas. So are you going with Wallace?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to support the Communist Party candidate Henry Wallace.
That's actually the reason that I'm not going to throw my full support behind Wallace. Because his campaign was heavily infiltrated by the Communist Party from the outset. Also, Wallace just had some really weird, like, just stuff. Like, one of the things that just sunk his campaign was this association with the spiritualist guy. I don't get it, but he was really freaking weird. And I think, well, I'm not as friendly towards Truman's, you know, vehemently anti-communist strategy in the Cold War. He definitely exacerbated the Cold War. I don't think that Wallace would have been able to prevent it. The Cold War was already going on. So I would have gone with Norman Thomas, who was an anti-Stalinist, even though I think this was his worst election showing. Uh, and, I would have gone with that because I wouldn't have been quite on board with Truman's foreign policy, and I wouldn't have been fully on board with Wallace's either, because I'm just an anti-Stalinist. So, yeah. But Wallace did have some good policies, and I think, domestically, had he been elected, things might have gone a bit better. But, you know, I think we can all say with.
One thing that I
Oh, go ahead.
one thing that I'll say is that this election was while Wallace was being accused of being a communist, Thomas, who was arguably further left than him, was able to get around it because he was able to he was a good orator and he was able to thoroughly convince America that democratic socialism was different than communism, like so well that every time there was like, oh, you're a communist, they would just ignore Thomas because they like, no, he's just a democratic socialist. He's already said this before.
Yeah, you're right. He was one of the few to get around there. Like, this was not. What sank his campaign was not anti-communism. It was, the Socialist Party was in such steep decline because of their lack of, support for the war, and the Democrats had stolen so many of their policies. And also, in that, like, one of the few things that remained prior to 48 was between the Socialists and the Democrats, and with the exception of anti-capitalism, was the Socialists were very supportive of civil rights. But what happened at the 48 convention for the Democrats? They adopted a civil rights platform. And of course, that's why we get Strom Thurmond in this race. And I think we can all agree that he sucks.
Well, I mean, we can say that about him as a person, but as a candidate, well, not as he did better than Wallace.
Yeah, and Thomas. But he was, his whole thing was defending segregation, and that's just gross. Because, it's amazing that he carried as many states as he did, but, he disgusts me. And we all know that everything that he did came out of one of two places. The first one was fervent racism. The other one was his testicles, with Strom Thurmond. Like, have you heard the stories there?
No, I have not.
Oh yeah, he fathered a what was it? An illegitimate child with his black maid. Yeah, which one was it? Yeah, was it? Yes, Essie Mae Washington Williams was his daughter, that he did not acknowledge and wasn't acknowledged by the family until after Thurmond was dead. But her mother was his African American maid. So yeah, he got around. Yeah.
A bit ironic.
Yeah.
Wait, wait, maybe that's how he would have been able to get out of paying child support because they would have been in segregated areas, so he wouldn't have been able to see them.
Yeah, yeah. Although maybe he just paid it in the wait in the inner wages though. So on to 52. Eisenhower, Stevenson, and who was you still had Darlington Hoops was the socialist candidate, and then you also had a progressive, right, with Hallinan. Yeah, Hallinan. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So who are you going for here? Are you gonna? Do you like Ike?
no.
No.
Well, I mean, sort of, but no.
Yeah.
The first thing I'll say is this is the one where I should give mention to the primary
Yeah.
because the Democratic primary in this election was
Oh, gee. I think you may have cut out. Oh, yep. Cut out again. One sec. Oh, you cut out again. Sorry. This thing.
why a Democratic primary voter. I would have given my support to Estes Kiefer.
Yeah. He was. He was. He was the guy that went around on with a coonskin cap, right? Or wasn't?
Yeah,
Yeah. Which.
and he actually won the primary.
Yeah.
And then no, we don't like you. We're gonna pick Stevenson.
Yeah.
So in the general election, I would have voted Hallinan because you screwed me out of my candidate, bro.
Yeah. So you would vote for Hallinan. Yep. I would have gone with Darlington Hoops, even though because I'm still a little loyal to that. The progressives, I don't know what their relationship with the communists still were, but that still would just make me a little uncomfortable. So I'm going with Hoops, even though he did, was the worst showing for the Socialist Party uh, up to that point. So I go with him, but I would not vote for Stevenson in that election either because he screwed Kiefer out of it. He didn't run in any primaries. This was the last time there was a multi-ballot convention for the Democrats.
He didn't run at all.
Yeah, he didn't. It was a terrible candidate. He kind of did it for his own ego. And so screw him. Ike wasn't the worst president in the world, although his foreign policy sucked. But in '56. Who would I have gone for in '56? Would you have gone for? Would you have gone ahead and bitten the bullet and voted for Stevenson in that one, or he's got Kiefer
for
he's got
56 again?
He's got Kiefer.
Yeah, I would have again gotten Kiefer in the primary,
but now he's
but in the general, but in the general, I probably would have done Adlai Stevenson because one, like I would have. You there?
Yeah, I'm there. Yeah.
Okay, so I would have gone with Stevenson in the general because one, this time the election was fair and square, and two, Kiefer's on the ticket, so he's at least like not he's doing something that Hillary Clinton didn't do, actually extend a branch to the more leftward field of Democrats.
Yeah, Hoops the Socialist Party at this point was basically dead, so I don't think I'm going to vote for them. So I'll go ahead and bite the bullet and vote for Stevenson because I do think Kiefer was pretty cool. Not just for the cap, but like having him on the ticket was pretty good. Although they ran an absolutely awful campaign, and Eisenhower won with a massive majority. So yeah. So I'd vote for Stevenson, but it wasn't really that big a deal. On to 60, and now we don't have a whole lot of third parties in this one at all. Like we have a few, like we have the Socialist Labor Party, we have the Prohibition Party, the States' Rights Party, which is not to be confused with the States' Rights Democrats. The States' Rights Party in this case is a neo-Nazi party. The Socialist Workers' Party, the first iteration of the Constitution Party, and the Conservative Party, which is not really a real party, but who are you going to go for in this one? Kennedy or?
Yeah, I'm gonna have to go with Kennedy because he's progressive on certain things,
Yeah.
but is not a full on socialist like some of these other smaller guys,
Oh yeah.
or not a full on neo Nazi.
Yeah.
So I'd probably just go with Kennedy.
Yeah. Like
Plus, look at the guy. He's smart, handsome. He's got charisma.
yeah. Like I would have voted for Kennedy for three reasons. Firstly, civil rights. He was a supporter of civil rights. Oh, damn it! Not again. We lost you again there for a
People
second.
like him.
Yeah. But he was a supporter of civil rights. He was, you know, on domestic issues, he did think taxes were too high and regulations were too stringent. But he was also a big fan of social programs and wanted universal health care and stuff like that. And then also, he would have been the first Catholic president. And so that, again, kind of matters. But the other, like, there is the focal point of his campaign, though, and this is what kind of helped him clinch victory, was he did actually attack the Eisenhower administration from the right on foreign policy. And, that does, you know, that was not great and all, contrary to the people who say that Kennedy was some peacenik. But, you know, those, those.
He was sometimes one.
It depended, like, he was very strategic in his way of, in his way of doing things. He was not like, would he have gotten us out of Vietnam? Maybe, probably not, though. But he wouldn't have escalated it like Johnson did, because he was very into, counterinsurgency type stuff. So I would go with Kennedy because, identity politics, and then also on social issues and civil rights, he was significantly better than Nixon. Um, but let's get to 64, and here you got Lyndon Johnson versus Barry Goldwater. And Kennedy, is sadly dead, but you don't really have any real third parties worth really mentioning. So, does it really? We're going Johnson. Like,
We're going with Jumbo.
yeah, Jumbo. Yeah, that's. Yeah, like his he did go a little negative with like the days he had and stuff, but Barry Goldwater was an absolute nutcase. The only thing that I think that he was right about in the long term was abortion rights. Everything else was like, cut taxes, deregulate everything, abolish the Civil Rights Act. Um, you know, because he hated Johnson for Medicare and Medicaid, expanding Social Security, the Voting Rights Act, and the Civil Rights Act were like the main things he went after Johnson for. And on foreign policy, he actually thought Johnson was too soft on the communists, I believe. So, yeah, like he was
Like, out of all the things he chose not to be libertarian on, why did he have to not choose foreign policy?
exactly, yeah. It's an oddball. He was absolutely crazy. He definitely has very much shaped the direction that the conservative movement has gone in, but is... Oh, damn it. Not again. Yeah, we keep losing the connection here. Okay. Come on. Okay, are you back? There we go. We keep
Yeah.
losing your connection there. But yeah, he was into. This was one of the first times that abortion became an issue in politics, although it was a very small one. But it kept the Catholics voting Democrat, actually, which is, very different from how it is today. But Johnson won this by a huge margin, and his only real challenger in the primaries was George Wallace, and we really want to give any support to Wallace? Like, no. Yeah. But let's get to 68. Oh boy, 68. Who are you going for here? I'm gonna need to think.
For the primary,
Well, you can start with the primary if you want.
um, like for the whole thing. Yeah, primary. I'm gonna go with Dean McCarthy, because he was the first hugely anti-war candidate. Though I will, I guess, have to give a shout out to Bobby Kennedy,
Yeah.
because even though he was running anti-war purely for him,
Yeah.
like, I mean, Jimmy McCarthy, he was anti-war openly for a while, but Kennedy kept his war policy secret
Yeah.
until he actually was like, "Oh, I can win an election with this."
Yeah.
Though he did give rightful criticisms to McCarthy, where he's like, "Yeah, you're anti-war, but what else? What are
Yeah.
you going to do after you pull out of the war?"
Yeah.
Though when the general election rolls around, because Democrats screwed McCarthy,
Yeah.
I'm like, well, I can't support whoever the Democrat is. So I'm gonna have to support a candidate that nobody's ever gonna see coming. Dick Greg Party.
Okay, I did not see that one coming. You went with so you would write in Dick Gregory of the, was he was the Freedom and Peace Party or
Yeah, he was the Freedom and Peace Party, which was a shoot off of the Peace and Freedom Party. I would have voted for them,
yeah,
but Eldridge Cleaver was not old enough to be president.
yeah,
Dick Gregory was.
yeah. I would I would actually have gone with Kennedy in the primary, mainly because, well, he was also anti-war, although not as stringently as McCarthy was. His civil rights policy and his social and economic policies were definite improvements over what McCarthy had. Although, fair to be fair, I think actually Humphrey had the best social and economic policies, but the worst foreign policy. Um, you know, because his foreign policy was stay in Vietnam. I actually would, in the general though, I'm gonna go with Cleaver, with Eldridge Cleaver, instead of actually Dick Gregory, because well, Eldridge Cleaver was an extremist within the Black Panther Party. He his views were somewhat sane and grounded in somewhat of reality, because Dick Gregory is kind of crazy. Like, but yeah, he's just a little too crazy for me. But yeah, obviously we're not going for Curtis LeMay and George Wallace. And please do not repeat your line from that video on here. You here? You there?
Well,
Hello? Hello? You still there? You still there? Shit.
no.
Okay, you're here. Okay, good. Thought I lost you again. Uh, but yeah, so I think we're neither of us would go with the Democrat in this one because they screwed up.
Am I there now?
Pardon?
They should have just let McCarthy win.
They really should have. Yeah, like in fairness, the strategy that they or the way that the convention worked at the time was not based around the primaries, and I actually have criticized the primaries a bit in some articles, but like the way that it did work in that regard was the other way was not great either. So they should have let McCarthy win because he did have the support of the rank and file. But 72. Oh shit. Oh god, why this Wi-Fi? I keep losing you. This Wi-Fi sucks. But yeah. So let's get to 72. Nixon and McGovern, and then there are some third parties here. We have the John G. Schmitz of the American Independent, Linda Jenness of the Socialist Workers, Benjamin Spock of the People's Party. Who are you going with? Oh, and also I should mention the Libertarian Party makes their first showing, with Hospers. Yeah.
Yeah, well, first I got to talk about the primary. I would have given a support to my sister, Shirley Chisholm,
Amen.
because she's like, I mean, like one thing I do know is she was a fighter,
Oh yeah.
100%. So we we she would have been a great person in the White House
Oh yeah.
if they let her in. But well, I mean,
Yeah.
I would have supported Ben.
One more time, you cut out there.
He just seemed like trying to do what La Follette did. Who I am voting for?
Yeah.
Okay, so after primary with Chisholm loses, I would have gone with Ben Spock of the People's Party
Hmm.
because he was. It was similar to La Follette's campaign. He was uniting a state socialist party in Michigan, a state socialist party in Vermont, and so on and so on. Like the Peace and Freedom Party in California,
Yeah, I think.
and he was talking about just good policy all around, like universal health care, abortion, gay people. You have a right to exist and be free.
Yeah. Yeah. That's I think that's fair. I would have also gone with Chisholm in the primary. She was easily the best candidate there. But I would also give a shout out in the primary to Muskie, actually, even though he was on the Humphrey ticket, he was, personally, he was anti war. And I think he would have been a stronger candidate than McGovern was, especially because he had more, friendly relationships with the labor unions. In the general, I'm going to go ahead and actually vote for McGovern because, well, McGovern was not the best candidate. His campaign really focused on two things. One was on ending the war, and the second was on, a UBI, and he didn't have much else beyond that. Uh, I would have wanted Nixon out, and I think so I would have gone with McGovern because he was running fairly progressive, although not as good, and also he basically lost as soon as the Eagleton fiasco, uh, went down. So he was, he it was his election to lose, and he did.
Honest, honestly, I don't. Honestly, I don't really trust McGovern that much because of what happened in 1968.
Yeah,
Like after Kennedy lost, I mean, after Kennedy died,
yeah,
you could have just let bygones be bygones and just let the Kennedy people go to McCarthy.
yeah,
But no, he's just like, no, 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 vote for me. I'm the true Kennedy successor.
yeah,
It's like, dude, you're just screwing McCarthy.
yeah. Like that's I get that. And also, he did there's a reason that he didn't get the AFL-CIO's endorsement because his labor policy sucked, and he kind of screwed them out of any influence within the Democratic Party. But I would, just vote for him anyway because he was, at least a voice against Nixon's war policy. Um, but I would Spock would definitely be my second choice. You know, but let's get to 76. Carter versus Ford. Um, in this one, like my this was actually one of the first ones that my parents were actually on different sides on. My mom backed Carter. They weren't old enough to vote in yet, but my mom was a Carter supporter. My dad was a Ford supporter. Um, in the Democratic primaries, oh god, I would have actually supported Fred Harris, who didn't really do very well, and I think he actually dropped out, didn't he? Before. He...
Probably he did. Yeah, I think he did drop out.
Oh no, he dropped out
Most people did.
in 72, but he did stay run. He had a surprise fourth place finish in the Iowa caucuses. Uh, and so I would have backed him on that in the primary there, but in the general, I'll let you go first on the general. Um, Lyndon
In the
LaRouche.
general,
Lyndon LaRouche, right? Yeah. Diggity, that's how he got me to vote for
well,
Lyndon LaRouche.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, putting gay people in camps in California, no duh.
Yeah, and we gotta expose
But
the role of the Queen in
I
drug smuggling.
probably would have voted. you're gonna get a bunch of comments about from LaRouche followers. They'll find you.
Oh,
Got followed a week later by someone who had LaRouche Pack as their website, and I'm like,
has that happened to you?
oh, I probably voted for McCarthy
Hmm.
because of his. Yes, they came after me. They found me.
Oh my god.
They didn't do anything, but they found me. I
Oh,
probably would have voted for, but I mean, Kameho,
yeah,
he does.
yeah. You know, I actually would have preferred Kameo to McCarthy.
Sorry, what do you think?
I would have gone with Kameo
Yeah, I would have.
over McCarthy, but Carter was probably a little too moderate for me. But I'm a little torn on this one. It would have been either Kameho or Carter. My one issue with Carter is he was very much a moderate Democrat, but he was he would have been he was better than Ford in a lot of ways. And in hindsight, he's one of the best presidents that we've had in the last in the latter half of the 20th century. Uh, because we can't. He lost in 1980 for things that were really beyond his control, like the inflation was really caused by Nixon. But he was like it would have been either him or Kameho.
I'm clean for Gene.
You're clean for Gene, yeah,
I'm staying clean for Gene.
yeah. McCarthy went a little nutty in my opinion after 68, but so now we're around to 1980. And this was the first election my parents actually voted in. My dad voted for Anderson. My mom voted for Carter because my dad was not into Reagan's bullshit. Um, but then you also got Ed Clark and David Koch of the Libertarian Party. And I curse David Koch's name every day. And like Barry Commoner, I'm actually, I'm open to. But would you go for Commoner?
Yeah, I would have probably voted for Commoner. He was the left option pretty much. Like he was the lefty.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. His
If he were on the stage, we would have had political issues.
yeah, that would. I think I'm gonna go ahead and give my back into Commoner there. His running mate was actually the wife of Fred Harris, who I mentioned earlier as my 76 pick. Um, and he was running on some important issues: environmentalism, pro science. You know, it's he wasn't really a socialist, but he was endorsed by socialists. So uh,
Like he never claimed he never claimed he was a socialist, but he did. He wasn't like turning away socialism. Like if a
yeah.
socialist wanted to support him, he wouldn't be like, "Ew, gross, get out of here."
Well, yeah, like and like you don't really even
Although,
turn that away unless it's like a Nazi. You do kind of want everyone's support, but uh, I'll give it to Commoner.
although, funny thing, like two people who they wanted to get the nomination to be their candidate, Barry Commoner and Ralph Nader,
Yeah,
and Nader was actually their first choice.
yeah.
And they went to Nader and they said, "Hey, can you run as our presidential candidate?" And he told them, and I quote, "I will never run for president."
Oh boy.
And then he never did.
Yeah, and he never did. And, like he was actually asked in 1972 to be after the Eagleton affair. McGovern actually asked Nader to be his running mate, and Nader said, "I'm not interested. I'd prefer to remain a private citizen." Um, boy, did that changed. 84. Let's get down to this one. So in this one, we've got. So again, we've got Reagan. He's the incumbent. Walter Mondale, David Bergland, Lyndon LaRouche, and his best ever showing, Sonia Johnson of the Citizens Party, and a few others that no one cares about. So are you going with Sonia Johnson or are you gonna go with Mondale?
In the primary, I would have went with Jackson 100%.
Oh, obviously,
But,
yeah.
but yeah, just in the general, there's no question, more than likely Sonia Johnson. Sonia Johnson was actually one of two people to convince Michael Moore to vote third party.
Really?
And, well, yeah, apparently he served as an elector for her campaign in his home state.
Oh, in Michigan. Wow, I didn't know that. That's actually pretty interesting. Uh, you know, Sonia Johnson would be. I would consider her, but I think I would go with Mondale. Just because I would the extra uh, wanting to get Reagan out because Reagan was just so utterly insane. And he was running on a pretty good platform, including supporting the Equal Rights Amendment. But Sonia Johnson did have some definite uh, improvements over that. Uh, I do just want to point out, I'm a little surprised by Lyndon LaRouche getting 78,000 votes, almost 79,000 votes in that election. I did not realize he did that well, but you know, yeah. How?
Well, Lyndon LaRouche is just a good camp.
Yeah, he's a great campaigner. Uh, people really care about the fact that the Queen of England is the kingpin of international drug smuggling operations. It just really matters to people. Oh my God, he's just what? Just my God. Uh, you know, I just wow. So 88. We're on to 88 now. We're almost into the home stretch finally. We've got Bush, we've got Dukakis, we've got Ron Paul, and we've got Lenora Fulani. Who do you vote for? Oh, and also,
Well, there's another guy you forgot.
oh, Willa Kinor. How do you say it?
I don't know.
Okay, the Socialist Party candidate. If you're watching, you see it. I just opened his Wikipedia page on the screen.
Oh yeah, I did a video on it, but I forgot how to say it.
Yeah,
I forgot how to say her name.
yeah. You know, like I think one thing both of us would agree on is in the Democratic primaries, you have to go Jesse Jackson. You know, Jesse Jackson was a great candidate.
Obviously.
Yeah, but you know, Mondale was incredibly moderate. Or not Mondale, Dukakis. Mondale was actually pretty progressive. Dukakis was incredibly moderate.
Well, well, actually, a lot of people say quite the opposite. They say that he was so far left that he lost the election.
They say that about
It
everything.
couldn't be that he liked him.
Yeah, like not like I'm pulling it up right now. It couldn't be this picture of him on the tank being the reason. That and also the Dirty Tricks campaign by what's his face Lee Atwater. But yeah, like I would probably go with the Socialist Party candidate in that one, whose name I apologize. Are they still alive? Yeah, they're still alive, so they may see this video actually. I'm very sorry, I can't. Kinor.
I
What? Watch the video that Pluribus Unum made on this on the Socialist Party USA. He says it in there. So, yeah. Would you go with them as well?
no, I probably would have gone with. I don't know if they list them on the Wikipedia page, but McCarthy ran in this race, and I think I might stick with him. But the Socialist Party candidate, I'm starting to lean a little bit into, but McCarthy, you just can't beat him unless there's a better candidate.
Yeah. Well, McCarthy by that time was actually kind of leaning into Reagan on some things. He was supporting he supported Reagan's strategic defense initiative and was kind of taking a libertarian stances on some stuff. So I'm not as enthralled with him. I'll tell you who I would not be voting for.
Well, if he's taking libertarian stances on good things, then I'm for it.
Mixed bag. I'll tell you one thing for
If he
sure.
takes libertarian stances on drugs, then yes.
Okay.
If he's taking a libertarian stance on the economy, no.
Yeah, well, he took some libertarian stances on the economy. Let me pull up the page here. Yeah. Let me scroll down to his Further activism, final campaigns. Here we are. He supported trade protectionism, uh, the Strategic Defense Initiative, and a few other a little weird weirder things. He actually endorsed Reagan in 1980. Yeah, he was kind of
Yeah,
a
he did go off the deep end sometimes, but then
yeah.
again, a lot of people did.
No, that's true.
Wallace ended up becoming a huge interventionist,
Yeah, he did. That is true.
so
Yeah. Uh, but I'll tell you who I would not give my support to: Lenora Fulani. She was an absolute nut. She still is an absolute nut. Uh, she's like the New Alliance Party a was basically a cult. So yeah. Um, so yeah, I would not be giving my support to her. Uh, and then Ron Paul ran in this one, which I still find a little weird. I found this weird video of him on some trash TV talk show, basically of him yelling at people about drugs. It was the weirdest thing ever during this election. I did not get it, but yeah. But yeah, I'm going with the Socialist Party in that one, Socialist Party USA. But let's get to 92. This is a tough one for me. Who are you going for? Lyndon LaRouche?
well, prior to now, I was full on in on Lenora Fulani,
Oh.
but I mean, I didn't know anything about the cultish stuff. I didn't know
Oh.
anything about that. I
Oh
just knew
yeah.
that she was a socialist feminist. That's all I knew.
Oh yeah. Like she was like the Fred Newman was the leader of the group, uh, and like his whole thing was called social therapy, and it was based like it was kind of like a socialist Scientology. Is probably the weirdest. Like it's probably the best way to call it. Um, it was considered a therapy cult. I pulled up the Wikipedia page on the screen here about it, but there were a few exposés written on them during the 90s, or actually even in the 80s, and their whole thing was like they were kind of grouped in with the LaRouche people because their whole beliefs were really they were very cultic, and there was a lot of abuse of their members, sexual and psychological abuse of members. It was messed up, and the thing is, they're actually still. Newman is dead, but Fulani's actually still around, and she's actually one of the leaders of the Independence Party of New York, which is basically just a ballot access scam. So yeah, but yeah, it's pretty weird. I'm surprised there's not as much information out there about it, at least on the internet, as I'd like to. It's this was still in the early days of the internet when this stuff came out.
Yeah, I might have to be going to Ronald Daniels maybe
Ronald
for his
Daniels.
campaign.
Ronald Daniels was. Ah, damn it. Oh, Ronald Daniels. Okay, yeah. Was of the. Okay, who? Oh, Peace and Freedom Party. Okay, yeah, Peace and Freedom Party there. I yeah, that's one that I might. I'm a little torn on this one. I would definitely vote for a smaller third party. I would not vote uh, for Clinton, too far to the right for me, and definitely not for Bush. And Perot was crazy. Um, so Daniels is one that might be. That's one that I hadn't thought about.
Fulani minus the cult.
Basically, yeah. And then also Brisbane of the Socialist Party USA. Uh, that's another. He's one that maybe I'd be. Uh, I might consider him as well. So I would. What was his name again? Peace and Freedom Party was
Ronald Daniels.
Ronald Daniels. Okay.
Technically, his campaign wasn't the Peace and Freedom Party campaign. They nominated him, but his thing was that he was running a campaign for a new tomorrow, which was supposed to be a extension of Jesse Jackson's plan, but like saying screw
Okay.
you to the Democratic Party, and also
Okay.
giving a screw you to Lenora Fulani because they had some disagreements.
Okay. So that's. Okay, yeah, he was a part of, he was associated with like Jesse Jackson's National Rainbow Coalition. So okay, yeah, so he's one to definitely, consider. Yeah. Uh, so either Ronald Daniels or Brisbane of the Socialist Party is who I give my vote to in that one. Because I'm not gonna vote for the three big ones because just no. Uh, the '96. You know, there was some. It was kind of a, with the exception of Bob Dole in the place of uh, George H.W. Bush. It was basically a repeat. But I'm giving my vote to Ralph Nader here. You?
100%.
Yeah.
Nader.
Who never said he would never run for president ever.
Yeah, never at all. Not one time, not two times, not three times, not four times. Just no times.
Yep, he's not gonna run. Oh wait, he is running for the Green Party now. So yeah, well, so it like the Green Party. You cover this in your video, which is very good. Which it gets a little complicated with the Green Party and they're because they're technically not yet the Green Party of the United States. They're still like the Association of State Green Parties or something. It's
Technically, there were two green parties existing at the same time.
yeah,
Well, technically, sort of. One, there was the National Party, which was called Greens/Green USA,
yeah,
and there was the Association of Green Parties, just all the state green parties getting together,
yeah,
and each of them individually nominated Ralph Nader,
yeah.
and he didn't even really campaign; he just accepted the nomination.
Yeah, he gave a couple speeches and a couple interviews, and that was the campaign. Which fair enough. Didn't it was the second best third party showing of that election after Ross Perot. So that was impressive. But on to 2000, and I know we're gonna get some hate for this, but you going Nader?
Yep, 100%.
Yeah, I'm going Nader
I'm,
too.
I'm
Oh, yep.
gonna give a special shout out to Bill Bradley. I wouldn't have voted for him. But have some good ideas. He was universal health care supporting,
Yeah.
but he did. Well, he was a huge anti-gay, so
Oh yeah,
like
it
he hated
was.
gay people. So
Yeah. Uh,
I mean, if Wellstone or if like Paul Wellstone
oh
ran,
my God, he totally should have
maybe we would
run.
have had something there. But
Yeah, he should have
the
run.
reason he didn't run is because he had back problems.
Really.
Like he had health problems that he was like, I was gonna run, but I have health problems, so I can't run.
I remember. Have you ever watched the Michael Moore's show from the late '90s, The Awful Truth? Or
No.
like they joked that Wellstone was going to run in 2000 with one of the characters, a giant chicken named Checkers, the crime fighting chick or the corporate crime fighting chicken, as his running mate was what they were going to do. And it's like Wellstone totally should have done that. May God rest his soul. Uh, but the one thing, like Bradley, if in the Democratic primaries, he probably would have voted for him. Cornel West voted for him, although he was also a DLC member, so he wasn't exactly left wing, but he was left. He was left of center, at least. Um, Although I will say this on the Michael Moore show, the show, not Michael Moore, the show endorsed Alan Keyes, even though the man's a right wing nutcase, because Keyes jumped into their traveling mosh pit.
Well, that's not until later.
What?
Well, I don't think they don't endorse Keys till later.
Well, no, they endorsed him like right before the Iowa caucuses. So yeah, that was yeah, because he jumped into the mosh pit. I think it was in Iowa. So yeah, but obviously we're both going for Nader in the general. But I do also want to give a shout out to it's based on the name now, David McReynolds, who recently passed away. Actually, he was had a couple conversations with him. He was a really great man, and he was a good candidate too. But I would have voted for Nader because just a stronger campaign in general, and would have had a much better chance. And he connection lost again. Damn it! Come on, you back? Okay, there we go. The connection cut out again, but I would have voted for Nader over McReynolds because he just ran a stronger campaign. And the goal was, this is one of the things Nader did right with the Green Party. He was very open about the fact is, we're not trying to win the White House, we're trying to get 5% of the vote. I wish that the Green candidates nowadays would be much more open about that one. So, But whatever. Uh, and I would invite everybody watching this to go and watch the Beat video on why Nader didn't cause Gore to lose. Uh, so if you're gonna comment with that, just stop. Like, stop right now. Yeah. So then 2004. In Well, let's talk about the Democratic primaries. There were a bunch of candidates. So who would you have backed of those? LaRouche?
In the primaries, um, even though a lot of them were kind of talking the same talk, like Dean was talking the same talk as Sharpton, and so was Carolyn Braun, I think. But ultimately, I would have voted in the primary for Dennis Kucinich
Yeah.
because one part, Dennis Kucinich actually stuck around until like the day before the election.
Yeah, until the
Which,
convention, yeah.
yeah, he dropped out like just the day before the convention
Yeah.
voted. So, like, because Kucinich is, like, I mean, consider the fact that Kucinich was so good that Nader and the Green Party itself were contemplating not running a candidate
Yeah.
because they're like, if Kucinich wins, we don't need to run a candidate.
Yeah. Like, and Dennis Kucinich was a little nutty in his own right. He claims to have seen an alien and, some other weird stuff. But, I would have voted for him in the primaries because he was the leftmost candidate. He was talking about single payer, and he was saying we're going to end the war. Like, those were his two big campaign issues, and those were, the two issues that would have mattered to me in that election. So, obviously, but like, and we're both left of center guys, so I'm guessing we're looking at our obvious choice is clearly Michael Paratuka, right? No, it's going to be either David Cobb or Ralph Nader. So who are you on for that, Cobb or Nader?
Well, very simply, Nader, because even the Green Party doesn't really like Cobb that much. Every time they talk about like failure candidacies, they always are like, we need to talk about David Cobb. Cobb sucked.
Yeah,
Like there was this whole controversy with the Green Party.
Cobb actually. I've spoken to him on over Facebook, but he's admits that he his campaign could have done a lot better. He's I think he gets a little too much hate from some of the Greens, but they should. I think they should have endorsed Nader in that one, and I would have voted for Nader in it.
When you're running against, like, no offense to David, but when you're running against Nader, the choice is clear. You
Yeah.
can't back anybody but him
Yeah.
unless there's.
You're right. Yeah, and Peter Cameo was a great running mate. He was a much better running mate than Pat LaMarche. No offense to her.
Yeah, and that was kind of his extension of like solidarity with the Green Party. Like, hey, no hard feelings, so I'll pick Peter Camejo, a guy who's been with the Green Party for a while now.
Yeah, that was a bit of an olive branch there, and he was. Kerry had voted for the war, so I obviously would not vote for John Kerry. And Nader was saying, "Let's get out of the war." So that's who I would go with. Because and then of course Bush was saying, "Let's keep the war going and bomb some more stuff." Uh, Apparently, Lincoln Chafee actually considered challenging Bush on an anti-war platform in the New Hampshire primary, but he decided not to after they captured Saddam Hussein. But Lincoln Chafee probably would have done better in that one than he did in the Democratic primaries in 2016.
Wait, so you mean more than zero?
Yeah, more than 0 votes. But he decided not to run. So 2008. Again, I'm gonna give a shout. I would think we should give a shout out to Kucinich again, but then also maybe a brief shout out to Mike Gravel. It's an interesting guy. I obviously would not.
Yeah.
I would have voted for Kucinich over Gravel because Gravel is. They're both nutty, but Gravel was a testimonial candidate. Kucinich was actually running. And so I obviously and Gravel also. They both believe in aliens. Let's just say that. And that's a little nutty. But in the general election, are you going to fall in line and vote for Obama, or are you going to go for a third party?
Well, first, let me give some semantics for the primary because this is just going to be weird. Ideally, I would have wanted to vote for Kucinich, but I would have probably voted for Gravel because by the time of the 2008 primary, when it gets to North Carolina, Kucinich had dropped out,
Yeah.
and Gravel had two, but he was still on the ballot
Fair enough. Yeah.
against Hillary and Obama. So technically, it would have been Gravel, even though I would have wanted to vote for Kucinich. But in the general election, I would have 100% voted for Nader
Oh yeah.
because, well, he's just an adherent lefty candidate.
Yeah.
He probably should have chosen some words a little carefully when he accidentally called Obama an Uncle Tom.
Oh
It's like, okay,
boy, I did not know
okay,
about that one. Yeah.
let me explain. Let me give context. You might understand where he's coming from when I give context.
Yeah.
He said he has to choose between being Uncle Sam for the American people or an Uncle Tom for big corporations. And it's
Oh.
like, Nate, I get what you're going for, but you probably should have
Yeah. That was.
chosen your words a bit more carefully there.
Yeah, that he should have. But yeah, like I'll still give him my vote, mainly because the only other left wing candidate in that race was Cynthia McKinney, and she was an absolute nutcase. Like, yeah, she's crazy. Uh, like, and also kind of anti-Semitic. So yeah, I'm going with Nader in that one too. But we're about to lose Nader as an option, so let's get to 2012. Obama versus Romney, and actually, this is the first campaign that I actually really took an interest in. And full confession, I actually supported Ron Paul in 2012, which is now a move I regret, but I did at the time.
You don't have to regret it. You don't have to regret it too much. You don't have to regret a little bit of it.
I regret
You
it.
have to regret you have to regret the economics of it, but
Yeah.
some other things that's fine.
I mean, yeah, but now we've got Gary Johnson. I did not know his middle name is Earl, but interesting. Jill Stein, Virgil Good or Goad, or I don't know. Roseanne
Good.
Good. Okay, Roseanne Barr and Rocky Anderson. So who you going for here? Anderson, Stein, Barr.
Well, first, again, we should talk about the primaries for
Yeah.
a little bit because there's, for starters, there was someone who was a big lefty should have run against Obama, and like they should have,
Yeah.
and there were a lot of potential contenders: Bernie Sanders,
Yeah.
Russ Feingold,
Yeah. That's fair.
Mike Gravel, Alan Grayson.
Yeah.
And there was even at one point Nader was considered an option to run
Yeah.
against Obama,
Yeah.
and Nader actually proposed an idea that I think could have worked.
Yeah,
Nader,
Nader, and Bernie Sanders and a few other people actually signed an open letter calling for a challenge, calling for a primary challenger.
yeah, and Nader had a specific plan for not just a primary challenger, but for many primary challengers.
Yeah.
His plan was that he was going to have like 5 candidates run against Obama, and it'd be like one focuses on healthcare, one focuses on foreign policy, one focuses on domestic. Like they all focus on different things that Obama failed the left on,
Yeah.
and would just hammer him on it.
Yeah.
But it didn't happen. Well,
Yeah.
there were like some small left wing challenges to Obama.
Yeah, two that I can think
Like
of.
you're not gonna know who any of them are.
Oh, I know who they are. Yeah.
You're not gonna know any.
I've actually spoken to one of them.
Which one?
John Wolfe Jr. I actually used to have his phone number.
Oh,
Yeah.
I did too.
Yeah. I
I
don't
did
know
an
what
interview with him. I did too.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
I did 2 interviews with him
Yeah.
when he was running for Senate.
Oh wow, I didn't know about his Senate run, but yeah, I would have. In the primaries, Kansas didn't even hold a caucus, so obviously I wouldn't have been able to support him, but he would have been my choice. Then there was Darcy Richardson, who did not get, who did worse than Wolf did, and I will say this for Richardson, he is a really good historian, you know, but I don't agree with his political strategies a lot. And if he does want to get in touch with me, I'd love to chat with him. Actually, I'd like to share some of my research papers with him, because I'd like to talk about that. Because I know you've spoken with him
I
before.
have his email if you want it.
Well, tell him, shoot him the video. Tell him to get in touch with me. I'd like to chat about some of my history papers. But I think his strategies were. I did actually like him. I was how was I 14 at the time? Yeah, I did support him in what. Sorry, I'm 22 now. Shoot, I can't remember how old I was in 2012. But yeah, I was or 2016. No, yeah, 2012. God, I'm losing my mind here. Uh, I supported him at first. Then after he did a bad showing in New Hampshire, I kind of went off him and focused more on Ron Paul. But then after Arkansas, I'm like, whoa, Darcy Richardson actually did pretty good. Um, and like the one problem is he just didn't have a delegate slate. So he was entitled to delegates, but he didn't submit a slate, so he didn't get them. But yeah,
I think are you still referring to Darcy or are you referring to Wolf?
Wolf didn't have the delegate slate.
Yeah. Because I know Wolf was the one who, like, after Louisiana, they're like, could he win Arkansas?
Yeah, they were saying
And
that.
then he was so close. He was
Yeah,
so close to winning Arkansas.
yeah, at 42% of the vote. But he did not submit a list of delegates to the Arkansas Democratic Party.
No.
Oh,
Conveniently, he didn't. He and a couple of other candidates didn't. They just so happened to not file that paper.
oh, well, I wouldn't put that
Like, it's
past
a
the Dem.
little.
Yeah. You're
Like,
saying?
I'm just saying. Like,
Yeah,
it, it. Like, I'm just saying. Like, him and like four other candidates just so happened to not file that paper.
yeah.
It's a little bit of a stretch.
Fair enough.
So yeah, primary. I would have hypothetically voted for Wolf if they let him on the ballot here.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
come the general, I'm actually slightly torn.
Mm-hmm.
You see, I ideally fit more with Rocky Anderson in regards to policy and such,
Yeah,
but I mean, I do align a little bit with Stein.
yeah.
So it's one of those two, but I probably would have voted for Rocky
Mm-hmm.
just because me and him just align more.
Yeah. I actually, in my cabinet behind me, actually, I have I have a bunch of Jill Stein 2012 signs lying around here because I actually was campaigned for her in that one. But I also, liked Rocky Anderson. But I obviously would have gone with Stein. I actually paid her write-in fee in Kansas. It was $20, and I, just mailed in a $20 bill. So, yeah, I did that as a teenager. And went around my neighborhood, giving out flyers for Jill Stein and had a bunch of signs. Had the T-shirt. No longer fits me, but it's I was a big supporter of. I supported Jill Stein in that election, and so I would have voted for her, written her in Kansas. But Rocky would have been a good second choice, but definitely not Roseanne Barr, because just why?
I have a video on that.
Yes, you do, yeah, and everyone watching should go check that one out. But she's crazy. Uh, so then on to 2016, and what was the first election you voted in? Was it 2016 or
The
Oop, cut out? Shoot. Oh, you're we lost you.
2018 midterms.
Oh, it was 2018
Midterms.
midterms. Okay, yeah. So you weren't even
Can you hear me
2016.
now?
Yeah, I can. Yeah. So it was the 2018 midterms for you. Okay. My first election was the 2016 election, and I caucused for Bernie Sanders in that one, obviously, which was awesome. In the general, though, I actually didn't just vote for, but I campaigned for and actually collected signatures for Jill Stein to help her get on the ballot in Kansas. So I have to say I voted for Jill Stein, and before anyone accuses me of spoiling it for Hillary, again, I live in Kansas. Do you think my vote really matters on that line? Just saying. But yeah, would you have gone for Stein in that one, or Johnson, or would
A
you have
burner for Stein.
a burner for Stein? Yeah, yeah. And Bernie actually did receive quite a few write-in votes in California, Vermont, and New Hampshire. and or no, he was able to vote for them in California, Vermont, and New Hampshire, and you could write him in 14 states. He actually got over 100,000 over 100,000 votes, mostly in Vermont. But I would have voted for Stein instead of writing in Bernie Sanders because in Kansas to get a to a write-in vote, the candidate has to actually give their consent to be a drafted candidate. Like that's why Chuck Baldwin was on the ballot in Kansas in 2012 for the Kansas Reform Party, even though he wasn't running. So, yeah. So Stein. So now we've gone through all the elections. So let's look ahead. Who are you backing so far in 2020? You probably said it in one of your fireside chats, which all of you should go and watch. But who are you backing so far?
I'm 100% for Bernie. Like, just technically, there's as a social democrat, he's the only person I can vote for.
Yeah.
He's a quote unquote democratic socialist,
Yeah.
so he's pretty much my only
Yeah.
candidate. There are some other guys that say some good stuff
Mm,
and bad stuff, but
yeah.
Bernie's just the guy that you have to pick.
Yeah, same. I'm fully behind Bernie on this one. But what if he doesn't get the nomination? Who will you go for then? I think you already said it on one of your podcasts. If a certain candidate gets the Green nomination, you'd be voting for her. But
Well, I mean, it depends on a couple of factors.
yeah,
One, who's the Democratic nominee?
yeah,
Two, who's the other nominees?
mm,
If like there's certain people that if they were the Democratic nominee instead of Bernie, I'd be like, all right,
yeah,
I guess. But there are just some definite just no's, like Biden,
yeah.
uh,
Bloomberg.
Klobuchar. Well, no, Bloomberg is great. Nader said that Bloomberg should run. Well,
Yeah.
I mean, it's true though.
Well, he did say that, but it's still Bloomberg sucks. But like for me, it will depend on what state I'm living in because I do graduate this May, and I don't know where I'll be living after that. But if it's Elizabeth Warren, I will vote for the Democrat. If it's not Bernie, if it's Elizabeth Warren, I'll vote for her. If it's Klobuchar, I might write in Eugene V. Debs. If it's Biden, I might do the same. If it's Bloomberg, I'll definitely do that or vote for a third party. But it does depend. I'm not. I'm kind of not sure I'm going to go with the Greens again. I'm just that, and but we should definitely get together later on in the election season and talk about some of these smaller parties because there are some crazy ones out there. The Free Soil Party is back. Yeah.
Well,
Uh,
kind of.
yeah, kind of. It's actually just an offshoot of the Prohibition
The
Party.
Constitution Party's having some. The Constitution Party's having some marital troubles.
Yeah. Again. Yeah. Don Blankenship is running for that. Just what the hell? That guy is so weird. The Bread and Roses Party, which is one I hadn't heard of.
And his other is.
Pardon?
And for the Constitution Party, his other option is a guy who said
Multiple times what? A guy who said what? Oh, come on. This thing is not.
Sir, what do you need to repeat?
Oh, the sound is cutting out again. Okay, one more time. Sorry.
And the other person that's most likely to get the Constitution Party nomination is Don J. Grudman, who's well known for quite a few things, like the Straight Pride Parade.
Oh, that. Oh, God. Okay, yeah. Oh boy, we're gonna need to talk about that one. But yeah, this is I like the Constitution Party doesn't get, they're largely irrelevant. But there's that's gonna be interesting. We'll need to get together in like the spring to talk about these smaller parties because it's gonna be kind of interesting. But yeah, but thanks so much for joining me today, everyone watching. Definitely go check out E Pluribus Unum's channel. This was great getting to chat with you today.
Likewise.
Yeah, and he's got a Q&A coming up, right? Oh, damn it, he's cutting out again. I want to apologize for the audio problems for all of this. Did I? Oh, I have it. Okay, so he cut out again. I'm so sorry, everyone. You still? Okay, we're
What?
okay. You cut out again because this Wi-Fi sucks. I'm gonna apologize yet again for the awful Wi-Fi connection here. There we go again. Okay, give it a sec. Okay, we should probably get out of here before we lose the connection again. But thanks so much for joining me today.
Anytime.
Yep. See you around.
You too.
Okay. Thanks so much, everyone, and thanks for watching. Sorry for the Wi-Fi troubles, and thanks to E Pluribus Unum. Go check out and subscribe to his channel, and please be sure to check out my new podcast as well. Thanks, everyone.